Chapter 17. New wine in new bottles, a new image of God. Neither do men put new wine into old bottles, else the bottles break, and the wine runneth out, and the bottles perish. But they put new wine into new bottles, and both are preserved. Matthew 9:17, Mark 2:22, Luke 5:37 and 38. The human world of today has not grown cold, but is ardently searching for a God proportionate to the new dimensions of a universe whose appearance has completely revolutionized the scale of our faculty of worship. Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, The Future of Man. If it be true that spirit is involved in matter, and apparent nature is secret God, then the manifestation of the divine in himself and the realization of God within and without are the highest and most legitimate aim possible to man on earth. Sri Aurobindo, The Life Divine. There is nothing I want to find out and long to know with greater urgency than this. Can I find God, whom I can almost grasp with my own hands in looking at the universe, also in myself? Johannes Kepler. From the first stirrings of conscious awareness, we have sought relationship with the cosmos. This is perhaps our deepest instinct. Gazing in wonder at the stars, naming the constellations, minutely charting the rising and setting of the moon and the sun, imagining a divine intelligence that has created the beauty and marvel of the earth, and longing to communicate with that intelligence, we have created many sacred images to draw us closer to the mystery. We now know that over a time span of many millennia, the image of deity changed from the primordial Great Mother of the Paleolithic and Neolithic eras to the many goddesses and gods of the Bronze Age, and finally, in the three patriarchal religions of the Solar Era, to the image of a single Father God. Although in the East, the older polytheistic pantheon, with all its rich mythology, survives to this day. Throughout this time, whatever the religion or the culture, the sacred image gave us a vertical axis, an Archimedean point beyond ourselves, keeping us in touch with a source or ground or mystery instinctively felt to exist. I think we can understand that as our conscious mind slowly evolved out of the matrix of instinct, the sacred image and the mythologies which grew up around it were like an umbilical cord holding us in touch with the foundation of life. But as we moved into the Solar Era and the monotheistic transcendent God image of the three patriarchal religions, the older shamanic relationship with the earth and a living cosmos was gradually lost, and with it the idea that the whole of nature was sacred, infused with divinity, ensouled. Today we live in an extraordinarily challenging time, when we face greater dangers but also greater opportunities than we have had in the whole course of our evolution on this planet. Many people feel that this century will be the ultimate test of our survival as a species. Not since the beginning of the Christian era has there been such a powerful impulse for transformation. On the one hand, the image of deity that presided over Christian civilization for 2,000 years is dying, and this process of the decay or waning of an archetype is affecting the whole world. On the other hand, beneath the surface concerns of our culture, we can see that a spiritual awakening on a planetary scale is taking place. This awakening is beginning to heal the great split in the patriarchal psyche between spirit and nature, and the dissociation between thinking and feeling that lies at the core of scientific reductionism. It is being led by men and women who are bringing into being a new paradigm of reality, and a spirituality arising from the need for direct connection with a transcendent dimension, a spirituality which recognizes and honors the interconnectedness, indivisibility, and utter sacredness of life. Their vision is creating a powerful alchemy in the culture, slowly transforming our understanding from lead into gold. Because of its fear of animism and its emphasis on a creator God transcendent to creation, Christianity lost the wider unifying dimension of soul that had held spirit and matter together. It lost the vital sense of relationship and communion with an unseen reality that ensouled the great organism of the planet, its mountains, rivers, springs, trees, plants, and animals. There has consequently arisen a dissociation between spirit and nature within Western civilization and within the human psyche, creating a deep wound that needs healing. During the solar era, the literal interpretation of the myth of the fall and the doctrine of original sin cast a pall over our lives and led us to look upon the earth as a fearsome place of punishment, suffering, toil, and death. I think it was these two related beliefs that undermined the older participatory experience of life that indigenous peoples have retained to this day in certain parts of the world. The ramifications of these two beliefs are enormous. I've explored them in earlier chapters and leave the reader to reflect on them, relating them to the current political situation where all three Abrahamic religions and the peoples who have embraced them are embroiled in conflict in the area of the planet where long ago they originated. The Christian meta-narrative, arising out of the matrix of Judaism, emphasized an image of God as a loving Father, concerned for the well-being of each and every creature, even the humble sparrow. Christ himself became a new God image, unifying divinity and humanity in his person, and offering a template to humanity of what all men and women could become, by discovering and manifesting the latent divinity within them through the creation of a direct relationship with that mysterious ground. Yet this great revelation, which pointed to the further evolutionary potential of humanity, already highly developed in the Eastern religions, was deflected into a new religion in which Christ's sacrificial death was interpreted as being offered for the redemption of the sins of the world, and specifically for Christians who had been baptized into the faith. The emphasis was on redemption through faith and belonging to a group with a superior revelation, rather than on the transformation of consciousness. Redemption was only available to believers. The great revelation of our time. We are moving from the story of a dead insentient cosmos to a new story of a cosmos that is vibrantly alive and the primary ground of our own consciousness. But more than this, we are moving towards a concept of God and of our relationship with God, which is a revelation as great as any we have ever had. We are moving from an image of God as a creator separate from creation to an image of spirit as the ineffable intelligence within the process of cosmic and planetary evolution, within us, with ourselves as participants in that process. An eternal consciousness participates in the life of this universe, and we are a manifestation of that consciousness, just coming to awareness that we participate in its life, that we are co-creators with it, that we are, essentially, divine beings. 4 of the greatest sages of the last century, Sri Aurobindo, Carl Jung, Bede Griffiths, and Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, saw the inner history of the world as the progressive incarnation of spirit, lived through the evolving soul of the individual. Jung said that the Holy Spirit was an impelling force, creating wider consciousness and responsibility and increased understanding. It was only quite late that we realized, or rather are beginning to realize, that God is reality itself, and therefore, last but not least, man. With that single sentence, he offered us a radically different image of God and a radically different image of ourselves. We have become participants of the divine life, and we have to assume a new responsibility, he wrote. The responsible living and fulfilling of the divine love in us will be our form of worship of and commerce with God. His goodness means grace and light, and his dark side the terrible temptation of power. Man has already received so much knowledge that he can destroy his own planet. Let us hope that God's good spirit will guide him in his decisions, because it will depend on man's decision whether God's creation will continue. Could we perhaps understand the story of the evolution of life on this planet as the story of the incarnation of cosmic spirit in our time and space, the story of its long evolutionary journey through stages of greater and greater complexity and diversification, and its awakening through our own human consciousness to awareness of itself? Seen in this way, the evolutionary unfolding of the universe becomes a divine drama, the drama of spirit incarnating in, from our perspective, the infinitely slow process of the forging of consciousness in the crucible of planetary life, and then being constrained within the limitations of that consciousness until it can reach the point of awakening and self-awareness. Cosmic consciousness, hidden from us by the filter of galactic and planetary evolution, cannot be recognized by us for what it is until our consciousness is sufficiently developed to become capable of recognizing it. Meister Eckhart, who lived from 1260 to 1327, put it like this: the supreme purpose of God is birth. He will not be content until his Son is born in us. Neither will the soul be content until the Son is born of it. That Son is the transformed consciousness of the individual, and ultimately, if we accept the evolutionary template offered by the four sages above, of all humanity. The world is not a random assembly of parts, but resonates with the imprint of a unifying and coherent intelligence. The physical universe is a kind of divine hologram that reflects in its tiniest parts the imprint of the higher unifying intelligence that created it. How we are treating planetary life, matter, and each other becomes a matter of how we are treating God. To injure the earth or to inflict pain and suffering on other human beings is to injure the universal consciousness, and since we are that consciousness, to injure ourselves. Everything we do affects the whole. This is such a different conception of God and of ourselves that it takes some time to assimilate its implications. The waning of the old order. 350 years ago, the Christian image of God was still the focus of Western civilization, and no one could imagine life without belief in God. The highest vision of the different religions of what has been named the Axial Age, beginning circa 500 BC, was that we were in the world, yet not entirely of the world, and could, through meditative and contemplative techniques, gain access to a transcendent dimension of reality that lay beyond the phenomenal world. In the Christian tradition, through prayer, we could ask God or Christ or the Virgin Mary to intercede in our lives. We could live a godly life following the model of compassionate service offered by Christ. We could trust in the teaching of the Church that our sins had been redeemed by Christ's sacrificial death, and that at our death we would be united with Christ in his kingdom. Then came the Enlightenment of the 18th century and the gradual weakening of this great meta-narrative. The roots of this change go back to Kepler and Copernicus and their discovery that the Earth moved round the Sun, so displacing the belief that the Earth was stationary and the fixed centre of the solar system. Their discovery, together with those of Galileo, 1564 to 1642, shattered the long-established Ptolemaic system and the belief in an ordered cosmos where the earth occupied the intermediate space between heaven above and hell below. They initiated the great age of science which developed over the subsequent 4 centuries. Sometime before Galileo, Luther's radical suggestion that each individual could have a direct connection to God undermined the authority of the Catholic Church as sole intermediary between man and God. The impact of these events was profound and gave rise to centuries of religious conflict as their implications worked their way into the consciousness of the culture as a whole. A further influence was Newton's formidable discoveries and the development from these of the idea of a mechanistic, causally determined clockwork universe governed by immutable laws. The powerful influence of Descartes' philosophy contributed to the growing fissure between religion and science, and between mind and matter. Galileo, Copernicus, Kepler, and Newton still saw their great discoveries as giving man insight into the mind of God and how the universe he created functions. The universe without God was to them still unthinkable. A later strand of influence came from the publication of Darwin's Origin of Species in 1859, and his totally different rendering of the appearance of man on this planet from that set forth in the book of Genesis. Just as Kepler and Copernicus's great discovery shattered the foundations of the medieval worldview, so Darwin's appeared to invalidate the Christian meta-narrative of the story of creation and the fall of man, and therefore implicitly the need for redemption by the sacrificial death of Christ. His theory seemed to undermine the need for the existence of God. Darwin's theory inaugurated a great age of discovery, as scientists working in different fields began to explore the geological, biological, and anthropological history of the planet. While science had begun to diverge from religion as a result of the persecution of Galileo, it gradually began to replace religion as the purveyor of new and exciting discoveries that could be tested and proven by scientific methods. Yielding to the pressure of this secular philosophy, Christianity began to weaken. In 1867, Matthew Arnold, in his great poem Dover Beach, wrote of the long withdrawing roar of the tide of Christianity. Recognizing the impact of Darwin's theory of evolution, Nietzsche, in his introduction to Thus Spake Zarathustra, asked the question, "Have you not heard that God is dead?" He was describing not so much the literal death of God as the decay of a belief system and an image of spirit that was worn out because it was no longer numinous and therefore relevant to millions of people. Within 100 years, the tide of faith had withdrawn so far that there was nothing to aspire to beyond the pursuit of aims that now dominate modern secular culture, whose gods appear to be money, power, and the rational mind. Within a few generations, the old certainties, weakened by all the influences outlined above, seemed, like Prospero's cloud-capped palaces, to have vanished into thin air, as the image of a transcendent reality and our long relationship with it faded. Reason, it was claimed, would replace faith. The rational mind of man would be the new God. The combined influence of Darwin, Nietzsche, Freud, and Marx in the late 19th century laid the foundation of a new secular meta-narrative. This material reality is the only one we need to recognize. There is no other reality, no transcendent dimension. There is no need to pray to God, nor can there be any expectation of union with God or Christ after death, because there is no God, no soul, and no kingdom of heaven. Death brings the extinction of consciousness. In 1963, Sir Julian Huxley confirmed this belief. Today, he wrote, "The God hypothesis has ceased to be scientifically tenable, has lost its explanatory value, and is becoming a burden to our thought. It no longer convinces or comforts, and its abandonment often brings a deep sense of relief." A huge vacuum was left by the weakening of the older meta-narrative, and into this poured the secular ideologies which ravaged the world in the 20th century. The utopian ideologies of communism and Hitler's vision of National Socialism seduced millions of individuals into succumbing to beliefs which brought enslavement and death to millions of others. The men who promoted them became inflated with a godlike omnipotence, as have contemporary leaders of whatever faith or none, who have unconsciously identified themselves with the power of the missing archetype. Edward Edinger sums up the effects of this situation in his book, The Creation of Consciousness, Jung's Myth for Modern Man. "The breakdown of a central myth," he wrote, "is like the shattering of a vessel containing a precious essence. The fluid is spilled and drains away, soaked up by the surrounding undifferentiated matter. Meaning is lost. In its place, primitive and atavistic contents are reactivated. Differentiated values disappear and are replaced by the elemental motivations of power and pleasure, or else the individual is exposed to emptiness and despair. The breakdown of the old meta-narrative. This was the general cultural atmosphere which as a young woman I found so perplexing and unsatisfying, having through my travels in the East encountered the idea that there was an enlightened state of mind or state of consciousness which could be accessed through contemplation, meditation, and a gradual alignment with a transcendent order of being. There seemed to be nothing in the secular West that could bring me to this level of being. No path to follow other than that of conventional Christianity, with its emphasis on belief, worship, and charitable works, or the path of science with its exclusive focus on the physical aspect of reality. The direct experience of the numinous was never mentioned in Sunday sermons. There was an emptiness, a longing for something that I sense was missing at the heart of both religion and secular science, an answer to the perennial human questions. Who are we and why are we here? What is the meaning of my existence? Why is life so full of evil and suffering? I became aware that thousands like myself were on a quest to answer these questions, to fill the vacuum left by the deconstruction of the old image of God and a weakening of the moral values that had guided Christian culture for centuries, however much these had been tarnished by the predatory emphasis on territorial conquest and the unbridled pursuit of wealth and power. At that time, in the 1950s and 60s, millions of people, including myself, were turning away from Christianity because its beliefs no longer evoked a response in our soul. For many, they were too literal, too remote from us, too male and paternal, too tied up with the inflexibility of dogma, too ignorant and intolerant of other traditions, and convinced of the infallibility of their own. Seeking a direct relationship with spirit, people turned to shamanic traditions, to the writings of Aldous Huxley, and to mystics like the Sufi poet Rumi. Many, as I did, traveled to the East to explore the teachings of Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, and Zen Buddhism, and study at the feet of Eastern teachers. Women went in search of what has long been missing in the patriarchal image of God, the feminine dimension of the divine, and the feminine values which were becoming increasingly diminished in a culture intent on the survival of the fittest and driven by a competitive ethos and a voracious consumerism. In a predominantly secular culture, it has become fashionable to dismiss religious beliefs as the residue of primitive and outgrown superstition. While I have sympathy with the secularist position, I am concerned that if we do away with God and a transcendent order, we are left with man's idea of what creation should be, and man's dream of manipulating creation to serve his own interests and needs. Whatever the abuses of it by religions which have claimed to know the will of God, the transcendent image has given us a moral compass to forge the values which could protect humanity from the dangerous hubris, the God Almightiness of the secular dream, as well as the undoubted distortions of the religious dream. These primary values are grounded in the service and protection of life, compassion, mercy, love, truth, justice, and freedom. An outworn image of God. Mythologically speaking, as the prevailing myth of our civilization wanes, dies, and disappears into the underworld of the collective unconscious, it could be said that we are living through a lunar phase of death or darkness. As the historian of culture Thomas Berry comments, we are in between stories. The old story, the account of how the world came to be and how we fit into it, is no longer effective. Yet we have not learned the new story. In mythic terms, we are waiting for the rebirth of the moon and a new story which could unite the whole of humanity in a shared vision of reality. During the phase of darkness, however, we are still living under the spell of the solar meta-narrative described in chapters 6, 9, and 14, the Promethean myth of progress and the mastery of nature through the power of our science and technology. This meta-narrative has no relationship with the transcendent dimension. The human mind is the supreme value. Progress serves the perceived needs of our species alone. In its hubristic stance, this secular meta-narrative has banished the unknown, unexplored, transrational aspect of life and of our own nature. Yet, paradoxically, this secular meta-narrative has developed out of the belief enshrined in the book of Genesis that God gave Adam dominion over the earth. The great mythologist Joseph Campbell writes in The Inner Reaches of Outer Space that from time to time the image of God has to die if it is not to become an idol. It has, he says, to become transparent to transcendence in order to be renewed. The same theme is reflected in the image of the death of the old king that is found in many alchemical treatises. In our time, the old king may be identified not only with an outworn image of God, but outworn beliefs, part religious, part secular, which can no longer provide an adequate container for the soul of humanity. It may be that the image of God needs to evolve because something in the old image is missing or incomplete. It may not be God who has died, but rather the image we have projected onto him, an image that was formulated by different priesthoods according to their level of understanding at a specific historical time. It may be that God is longing for release from his imprisonment in the straitjacket of our beliefs. Or, to use a gardening metaphor, God has become pot-bound, constricted by the anthropomorphic, gender-biased, paternalistic image that was projected onto him millennia ago. Like a conjurer demonstrating his skills, we have cut God in two and have utterly lost the sense of the divinity of nature. We have fixed the image of deity in the masculine gender, refusing until very recently to entertain the idea that the feminine aspect of spirit is essential to the completion and balance of the image of deity, and to the balance of a civilization. As Teilhard de Chardin suggested, we need to formulate a radically new image of God and a new cosmology that is related to the phenomenal discoveries of science, which have revealed the stupendous dimensions of the universe. We also need an image of the sacred marriage that can unify spirit and nature, the two aspects of life sundered by the beliefs that arose during the solar era. As Teilhard de Chardin pointed out, something seems to have gone wrong in the way God is represented to man. Man would seem to have no clear picture of the God he longs to worship. Jung foresaw this situation in his book Psychology and Religion, West and East. He understood that Nietzsche's phrase, the death of God, was not to be taken literally, any more than the doctrines of the Church about the virgin birth and the bodily resurrection of Christ were to be taken literally, but described a profound transformation that was at work in the depths of the modern psyche. Addressing the need for the emergence of the Christian myth in a new form and offering a mythical and symbolic interpretation of Christ's death and resurrection, he wrote, "The myth, says he, Christ, was not to be found where his body was laid. Body means the outward visible form, the erstwhile but ephemeral setting for the highest value. The myth further says that the value rose again in a miraculous manner transformed. The 3 days' descent into hell during death describes the sinking of the vanished value into the unconscious, where, by conquering the power of darkness, it establishes a new order, and then rises up to heaven again, that is, attains supreme clarity of consciousness. The fact that only a few people see the risen one means that no small difficulties stand in the way of finding and recognizing the transformed value." Once again, as in the early centuries of the Christian era, it seems as if new bottles are needed to hold the wine of a new revelation. As Jesus pointed out 2,000 years ago, bottles become worn out and have to be replaced. But how do we create the vessel which can assimilate the wine of a new vision of reality and a different image of God? How do we relinquish the dogmatic beliefs and certainties which have, over the millennia of the patriarchal era, caused indescribable and quite unnecessary suffering, and the sacrifice of countless millions of lives? I cannot answer these questions, but I do know that as the new wine comes into being, we have to hold the tension between the old and the new. It must have been like this 2,000 years ago when the disciples of Jesus tried to assimilate what he was telling them, something so utterly different from the belief system and the brutal values that governed the world of their time. Those new teachings and those different values seem barely to have touched the consciousness that currently governs the world, however much political and religious leaders proclaim their allegiance to them. Millions claim to be Christians, yet those same millions subvert the teachings of Christ about compassion and not shedding their brother's blood. Christianity seems to have degenerated into feuding between its different branches over such issues as homosexuality and women priests. Much of what was lost to Christianity during the early years of persecution has been recovered, including the important Gnostic texts recovered in 1945 at Nag Hammadi in Egypt. But there is as yet no cultural vessel to receive this recovered material, no way in which it can be integrated or married with the orthodox religious traditions, because these cling tenaciously and even fanatically to the literal interpretation of the old bottles, the revelatory texts written down millennia ago. The level of consciousness so far attained by believers does not seem strong enough to tolerate a change in the image of God. Yet if the image of spirit does not change, so that there is a marriage between the masculine and feminine archetypes, it seems doubtful that human consciousness can evolve further, either because it is enthralled to an unbalanced or incomplete image of God, or to an atheism which repudiates the whole idea of God. We now know why the feminine dimension of the divine was repudiated by the three patriarchal religions, but it does seem astonishing that they do not appear to question the concept or image of God they have inherited from the past. As Suzanne Schaub points out in her book, Sophia, Aspects of the Divine Feminine, the image of God in Western religion, including Judaism and Islam, is a masculine one, despite all protests to the contrary. And as such, it is a direct cause of the devaluation of the feminine and feminine priorities in our culture. That which gives a culture legitimacy is ultimately its underlying concept of God. If this concept does not change, nothing can actually change. No scientific, ecological, or social paradigm shift can take effect, as long as the theological paradigm does not change along with it. Despite the efforts of many feminists to marry a feminine image of deity with the masculine one, and the worldwide change of consciousness that is gathering momentum with regard to our relationship with the planet, it is nevertheless a fact that the world is still ruled by a patriarchal mindset. The great nations of the world are still competing with each other for power and resources, rather than coming together to serve the endangered planetary organism. There is as yet no political consensus about how to work together and how to formulate different values, although a movement in that direction is growing and becoming increasingly articulate. It seems as if we are living through a tumultuous interregnum, made critically dangerous because of our immeasurably enhanced capacity to destroy each other and irreparably damage the fabric of life on this planet. While the death of God has been welcomed by a secular culture, this fact nevertheless creates in many people an unconscious anxiety and a deep fear of the void, and gives rise to a moral vacuum as well as a defensive fundamentalist position in both religion and secular science. The jihadist who believes that it is God's will that Islam should conquer the world may draw the power of his ideology from this fear, as may Christian fundamentalists. The root of the tendency to polarize lie deep in our solar past, but they are strengthened whenever there is a situation which arouses uncertainty, anxiety, and conflict. The conflict between the three patriarchal religions. It could be said that the dangerous political situation in the Middle East, with Jerusalem at its heart, is at root a conflict between three religious traditions, each of which believes itself to be the carrier of a special and unique revelation, and each of which holds Jerusalem as its holy city. Any threat or challenge to the belief system is met by a furious and at times hysterical defense. The reason for this seems to be that at the deepest level of the psyche, religious beliefs are tied into survival instincts and also to possession of the land held sacred for generations. A threat to a religion is a threat to the survival of that group, and the deep and sacred bonding between members of that group and the land that God was believed to grant to that group millennia ago. Because these beliefs are so deeply held, and because beneath them lies the terror of the meaninglessness of human existence, it is rarely possible to have a discussion about whether certain beliefs might need to be modified and even discarded in the light of a new understanding. In the distant past, the Jewish belief that they were the chosen people left other groups excluded and gave a Cain and Abel twist to relationships between different religions and ethnic groups. The Christians claimed that they too were chosen to carry a revelation that was brought to them by the only Son of God, and their religion was therefore, by implication, superior to others which it would ultimately supplant. This conviction led Christianity into an inflated evangelical position, which led it to look down on other religious traditions and attempt to convert their believers to the true path. What course was left to Islam other than to try and emulate the Christian example by propagating the spread of its religion by all possible means, attempting to supplant Christianity by sheer weight of numbers and force of arms? Psychologically speaking, this whole unconscious process set up a massive sibling rivalry between the three patriarchal brothers, wherever their specific revelations were interpreted in a literal and divisive way. The old atavistic behavioral pattern of predator killing prey, already deeply embedded in tribal rivalries, was unconsciously incorporated into religions. Human sacrifice in defense of a belief system or an ideology was sanctioned as something that was acceptable to God, something that God would approve of and support. The idea that a particular belief system was truer, more pleasing to God than others, and offered a path of salvation denied to those following a different belief system, was accepted and taught as part of a religious tradition, indoctrinating generations of children with this pernicious idea. Worse, the idea that anyone who was a threat to that tradition could be killed in order to preserve or promote the true religion was woven into the fabric of the teaching, and from there found its way into ideologies and relations between nations. The Christian church was flawed from the 4th century by the exclusion of certain Gnostic texts that were deemed unacceptable by a group of very powerful individuals, as well as by its incorporation into the powerful political institution of the Roman Empire. Its sacred mission was subverted by the means it adopted to maintain and extend its power. The abuse of God. The image of God we have inherited from the patriarchal religions portrays a transcendent God creating the earth from a distance, distant and separate from the created world and ourselves. What was lost was the idea of the immanence of God, an idea that the Jewish philosopher Spinoza, 1632 to 1677, was briefly to revive in the 17th century, suffering persecution by his Jewish community for daring to suggest it. This image of God became embedded in belief systems which fixed the Godhead in the image of a male deity and rejected or failed to include both the feminine dimension of the divine and the idea that material creation, including the body, is a theophany, a showing forth or manifestation of a divine ground or source. How then could human life, human experience be valued and honored as something precious, something sacred, a vehicle of divinity? How could the life of the earth and its species be respected? The archetypal image we created widened the split within our own nature between the conscious mind and the matrix of instinct. The problem may not lie with God, but how God has been used to serve our own agendas. Christians, to focus on only one religion, have believed that God ratified their prejudices in their persecution of women, homosexuals, blacks, and people with a different belief system from their own, whether Jews, Muslims, or the indigenous people of different continents. They have claimed that the Christian revelation was superior to that of others, and have tried to convert people to the true path to God, proclaiming that belief was the path to redemption, and that outside the church there was no salvation. For centuries they persecuted shamans, visionaries, prophets, mystics, and all those who might have introduced a different experience of spirit. Meister Eckhart, one of Christianity's greatest mystics, who said outside of God there is nothing, would have been burnt at the stake if he had not fortunately died before the church could implement a trial and a sentence of death. Giordano Bruno died at the stake for proclaiming that God was present in nature. For all the extraordinary achievements in holding society together in a shared vision, the abuse of God and God's creatures has been a major flaw throughout the history of patriarchal religion. With the death of God proclaimed by a secular culture, many of these old habits and beliefs are changing. Yet still we hear Christian believers quarreling among themselves over homosexuals and women priests. In the name of Islam, we see the ongoing persecution of women, as in Afghanistan and Pakistan, and in Iran, an authoritarian and oppressive theocratic regime. We see the unsolved bloody enmity between the Shia and Sunni branches of Islam. In many of these instances of persecution, there is a conflation of ancient tribal custom and human prejudice with divine command. What use is belief if it does not lead to a deepening of understanding and compassion? And what use is the continued worship of God's sacrificed Son if nothing fundamentally changes in our habits of behavior? Would Christ have approved of weapons of mass destruction, of Hiroshima, of depleted uranium, cluster bombs, unmanned drones, and the bombing of Baghdad? The literalist reading of the book of Revelation has led evangelical Christians, no fewer than 40% of Americans, eagerly to anticipate the end days and Armageddon, the final battle which is to be the precursor of the rapture and second coming of Christ. Shia Muslims await the return of the Mahdi in the same expectation of a new world order. Ultra-Orthodox Jews await the Messiah. All ideologies which invoke the coming of a new order after the elimination of an old one, and the recurrent millennial belief that a new order will be ushered in by a final battle, have their ultimate origin in lunar mythology and the rebirth of the crescent moon after the banishment of its dark phase. However, influenced by the polarizing legacy of solar mythology, expectations of the arrival of a new order generally accept massive sacrifice in the final battle between the forces of light and darkness as a necessary preliminary to the establishment of the new order. Born-again Christians believe that only the chosen will be saved in the rapture, taken up to heaven from one moment to the next. The rest will perish. When literalist beliefs take over the collective psyche, aroused in a credulous public by priests and prophets convinced of the authenticity of their message, they can override the highest values of religion and cast what can only be described as a spell on those who claim to believe in God. All this perversion has arisen from a mistaken concept of what deity is, the worship of an idol rather than the true insight into the nature of divinity. Yet when read as metaphor rather than the literal word of God, these prophecies about the end of the world and the coming of a Messiah and a new world order could be understood as referring to the raising of the consciousness of the whole of humanity, rather than predicting the appearance of a Redeemer who will impose a new order. Rabbi David Cooper, for example, writes in his book, God is a Verb, Kabbalists say that we are rapidly approaching another major paradigm shift in awareness. It will be called Messianic consciousness, and we will understand everything in an entirely new light. The influence of the East. From the 1950s, more and more people, disillusioned with Christianity, began to travel to the East in search of the wisdom enshrined in the teachings of Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, and Sufism, the mystical tradition of Islam. A priceless treasury of texts from the East began to flow to the West. From these, they learned methods of meditation which could open a direct path of communion with a transcendent dimension of reality, a path to the experience of enlightenment. As I had done on my 2 journeys to the East, they encountered a radically different image of spirit, as well as the concepts of karmic responsibility and reincarnation. They absorbed the idea that suffering arises from unconsciousness or ignorance of the fact that spirit is the ground of all life. Each of these ancient traditions has contributed to the birth of a new consciousness in the West. Many texts became available in excellent translations for a new and interested audience. The celebrated poems of Rumi drew a cult following. Sultrim Alioni drew attention to extraordinary women in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition in her book Women of Wisdom, published in 1984. Aldous Huxley's books opened the door to psychedelic experience and the recovery of the shamanic traditions of indigenous people. Publishers sprang up who specialized in these books. The invasion of Tibet by China in 1950 forced many Tibetan monks to flee to India, America, and Europe. Some learned English and other languages, became renowned teachers, and wrote books which had a considerable impact on Western culture. Sogyal Rinpoche's book, The Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, for example, was widely read. They brought with them ancient methods of healing and meditation and offered different approaches to healing the sickness of body and soul. His Holiness the Dalai Lama is recognized by millions as the greatest spiritual leader in the world today. California was for many years a focus for the development of these ideas, practices, and contemplative methods of the East, and a center for the spiritual development of the individual. But Europe also benefited, as Tibetan monks established temples and teaching centers in several countries, bringing Buddhism to many thousands of people looking for a different approach to spirituality. The Vietnamese monk Thich Nhat Hanh established a renowned center at Plum Village in France. The Maharishi Mahesh Yogi attracted thousands to follow his method of transcendental meditation and established a center in England. People began to seek out new methods of healing, such as acupuncture, aromatherapy, reflexology, and Chinese herbalism, as well as Ayurvedic medicine and the already well-established approach of homeopathy. Despite the sometimes virulent opposition of established medicine and science to these ancient methods of healing, thousands of men and women have now trained in them, and millions are being treated by them. The focus of this approach to healing is on an empathic, holistic attitude which treats body and mind as an organic whole. All these different influences began to have an impact on the vacuum left by the deconstruction of the image of God inherited from the patriarchal past. The cosmology of the East. In the religions of the East, we find a unifying approach, one that is much closer to the teaching of Kabbalah described in Chapter 3. Apart from that tradition, the Indian science of the soul is the oldest, wisest, and most highly developed on the planet. For at least 5,000 years, possibly longer, the great sages of India taught the underlying unity of all creation and never separated the visible and invisible dimensions of reality. In their view, the entire organism of the world we know, as well as the organism of our individual human self, are the expression, manifestation, and dwelling place of spirit. Professor Ravindra tells us in his book, Science and the Sacred, the one central insight into truth to which all Indian wisdom points is the oneness of all that exists. This insight is not alien to other cultures, but in India all the great sages again and again return to it. In fact, the realization of this truth is what defines the greatness of a person in India. Although the truth is easily stated as all is one, the sages have also said that the realization of this truth in the core of one's being can take many lifetimes, and the realization of this truth is held to be the purpose of human existence. All art, philosophy, and science, if they are true, reflect this vision and further its realization. During a period of at least 4,000 years, the sages of India have repeatedly asserted the underlying unity of all that exists, including everything we call animate or inanimate, and have said that the cultivation of wisdom consists in the realization of this truth. The mystics of all the great cultures of which we have knowledge discovered that our consciousness can interact with the invisible ground of life, that they named Brahman, the Tao, or simply the void. Christian mystics spoke of the mystery of the divine darkness of God. Dionysius the Areopagite, living in the 5th century AD, wrote that the most divine knowledge of God, that in which he is known through unknowing, according to the union that transcends the mind, happens when the mind, turning away from all things, including itself, is united with the dazzling rays, and there and then is illuminated in the unsearchable depth of wisdom. Over 1,000 years later, an English poet, Thomas Vaughan, 1622 to 1695, wrote these beautiful words: "There is in God, some say, a deep and dazzling darkness. Oh, for that night that I in him might live, invisible and dim." The Vedas, the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, the Jewish mystical tradition of Kabbalah, the Christian and Sufi mystics, the Buddhist and Taoist sages all suggest that spirit can ultimately only be known or apprehended experientially, and that spirit is omnipresent, at once transcendent and immanent within the forms of life. We are bathed in, permeated by spirit every moment of our existence, in every breath we take. In the light of this different understanding, spirituality invites us to focus more on the experience of illumination than on faith and belief. The search for a unified vision, healing the wound in the body of God. Many years ago, I had a dream that I was walking in a wilderness of rock and shale, a landscape similar to the one above the tree line of the Alps. Suddenly I heard a faint voice crying, "Help me! Help me!" I looked around but could see no one. The cry was repeated and seemed to come from the ground at my feet. I looked down and saw a tiny leather purse lying in the dust, almost hidden among the rocks and boulders. I picked it up and opened it. Inside was a small stone, and it was from this that the voice was coming. Does a stone have consciousness, I wondered? Can it communicate with me in words? "How can I help you?" I asked the stone as it warmed to the touch of my hand. It gave me no answer, but the urgency of its plea haunted me. I had to find out what needed help and how I could help. Finally, I understood that what needed help was the consciousness that is buried in the deepest aspect of our psychic life, as well as in the densest aspect of matter, that we are told is dead and has no consciousness, a lost aspect of spirit that has not been recognized as spirit, something that asks to be redeemed from a state of immolation created by our beliefs. The image of spirit inherited from the past may from time to time need to be discarded, but the archetype of spirit will always be rediscovered in a new form, incorporating aspects of itself that may have been split off or excluded in the past by our too limited understanding. Years after this dream, when I was exploring the teaching of Kabbalah, I found this passage in a translation of a text written by the great 16th century Kabbalist Moses Cordovero, and realized that this was the definition of God that I had been searching for and could not find in Christianity. The essence of divinity is found in every single thing. Nothing but it exists. Since it causes everything to be, no thing can live by anything else. It enlivens them. Its existence exists in each existent. Do not attribute duality to God. Let God be solely God. Do not say, "This is a stone and not God." God forbid. Rather, all existence is God, and the stone is a thing pervaded by divinity. Nothing is devoid of its divinity. Everything is within it. It is within everything and outside of everything. There is nothing but it. These words seem to resonate not only with those of Meister Eckhart and many other mystics, but also with the words of Jesus in the Gnostic Gospel of Thomas, when he said that the kingdom of God is spread out upon the earth and men do not see it. The insight that divinity is present in every single atom of life is precisely what has been missing in our concept of God, and it is this which has led to the split between spirit and nature, and ultimately to that between religion and science, as well as to our growing capacity to inflict destruction on each other and on planetary life. Nature as a theophany. Amazingly, in the 9th century, there was a most beautiful and clear exposition of nature as the expression or theophany of spirit. This concept flourished in Celtic Christianity until this branch of Christianity was set aside after the Synod of Whitby in AD 664 in favour of the Roman or Catholic version of Christianity. Yet it must have survived, for it is found in the work of John Scotus Erigena, 810 to 877, a renowned Irish scholar and Neoplatonist who lived at the royal court in France for many years and contributed by his translation of the works of Dionysius the Areopagite to the great cultural impetus which led to the building of the Gothic cathedrals. He also wrote an extraordinary book called Periphysion, or De Divisione Naturae. I first came across this book many years ago when I was studying medieval history at Oxford, and it made a deep impression on me at the time. But I did not realize its significance and its relevance for our times until recently, when I came across these electrifying words, communicated from teacher to pupil, which eradicate the split between creator and creation. We should not therefore understand God and creation as two different things, but as one and the same. For creation subsists in God, and God is created in creation in a remarkable and ineffable way, manifesting himself, and, though invisible, making himself visible, and though incomprehensible, making himself comprehensible, and though hidden, revealing himself, and though unknown, making himself known, though lacking form and species, endowing himself with form and species, though superessential, making himself essential, though creating everything, making himself created in everything. The maker of all, made in all, begins to be eternal, and though motionless, moves into everything, and becomes all things in all things. Hence, matter itself, from which, as we read, he made the world, is from him and in him, and he is in it, insofar as it is understood to have being. How radically different is this view of God from the one currently set forth by the three major patriarchal religions. How satisfying it is, and how close it is to the Eastern traditions. God is described as both hidden source and manifest process, or form, both transcendent and immanent, just as in the tradition of Kabbalah. Erigena's book was condemned by the Church because it was thought to promote the idea of pantheism, that God was present in nature. Fortunately, his remarkable book survived, although he himself is said to have been murdered by his own monks at Malmesbury Abbey when he returned to England, no doubt because of the heretical nature of his ideas. New wine in new bottles, the new spirituality. Over the past 50 years, a gradual restoration of a sense of the sacred has been taking place beneath the surface of our culture, called forth by the multifaceted crisis of our times. Now, through the awakening power of the environmental movement, as well as through the new discoveries of science, we are invited to enter a new era where nature, the life of the earth, and all the miraculous processes and patterns of life can once again be recognized as sacred, as they once were in shamanic cultures. This new movement that some name as the Great Awakening is beginning to heal the split between spirit and nature, or the wound in the body of God which has so tragically flawed the three patriarchal religions and the whole solar era. However, because neither mainstream religion nor science are aware of the origin of this split and its influence on our attitudes and our behavior, neither seems able adequately to engage in this process of awakening and address the immense challenges we face today. There is huge resistance to change because instinctively we perceive change as a threat to our survival. It is safer to stay with the known rather than forge a path into the unknown. Something beyond either needs to come into being, a new meta-narrative, a new worldview. As in the medieval story of the Grail, where Parsifal, after many trials, heals the wound of the Fisher King by asking the question, "What ails thee, father?" Perhaps we need to ask this same question of our beliefs, our values, and our culture. Joseph Campbell recognized the need for a new myth when he wrote, "What is the new mythology to be? The mythology of this unified earth as of one harmonious being." And he answered the question by saying that the new myth is that earth is the country to which all people belong. He saw that this new myth of the earth as our cosmic home could take us beyond the divisions and rivalries that veil our essential relationship to each other and our relationship to the planet and the wider cosmos. Thousands, if not millions, of individuals today are searching not only for the unified field in science, but for a unified vision of life, a unified vision of spirit, nature, and humanity that could be in time to mitigate the catastrophic effects of our fragmented view of life. The birthing of this vision asks us to relinquish many cherished beliefs and requires a fundamental transformation of our values. Our knowledge about the world and the universe is accelerating geometrically. We are overwhelmed with information about every aspect of what we observe. Yet we understand almost nothing about the mystery of why we are here and what the evolutionary role of our species on this planet might be. Suppose the cosmic source we come from is attracting us back to itself, helping our consciousness to connect with it, to respond to its evolutionary intention. There is today a crying need for a new way of living and relating to each other and the cosmos. It is brilliantly reflected in a poem written in 1945 by Christopher Fry in his play called A Sleep of Prisoners. The human heart can go the length of God. Dark and cold we may be, but this is no winter now. The frozen misery of centuries breaks, cracks, begins to move. The thunder is the thunder of the flows, the thaw, the upstart spring. Thank God our time is now when wrong comes up to face us everywhere, never to leave us till we take the longest stride of soul men ever took. Affairs are now soul size. The enterprise is exploration into God. Where are you making for? It takes so many thousand years to wake, but will you wake for pity's sake? The old idea that we are separate from God is breaking, cracking, beginning to move. A regenerative spring is urging us to take the longest stride of soul we have ever taken into the heart of God. The extraordinary discoveries about the size, complexity, and incredible beauty of the universe are opening the door to a new cosmology, a new way of living and relating to each other and the planet. This dawning meta-narrative is bringing about a breakdown of old beliefs, old images of God and nature, and our own human nature. It is challenging our political and economic structures, our enslavement to obsolete beliefs and atavistic habits of behavior. It is awakening our heart, our soul, often through means which may appear bizarre or threatening. Sometimes, as people working in the field of psychotherapy know, there has to be a breakdown before there can be a breakthrough. The deconstruction of the old image of God may be one aspect of that necessary process. There is a risk that breakdown could precipitate regression to a more unconscious state, where we could lose the priceless treasure of civilization. Everything depends upon whether we assist or resist the simultaneous process of death and rebirth that is taking place within us and our culture. It is a time of awesome responsibility. The problem now is that the culture is in a dilemma. Part of it, particularly that part concerned with established institutions, whether religious or political, is still acting from the old solar paradigm of the separation of spirit and nature. It still thinks in terms of competition between nation-states. It is still hypnotized by the idea of power and progress, intent on conquering and controlling nature and exploiting the resources of the planet for the financial gain of a few nations and corporations, and for the benefit of the human species alone. It glorifies the technological achievements of science, but neglects to address the poverty and suffering of billions of people, and the disastrous effects of the burgeoning growth of the human population on the planetary organism. As in 2012, the human population passes the 7 billion mark, It cannot see that a viable life is becoming increasingly impossible for those billions who already struggle merely to survive without adequate food and water, let alone quality of life. The other part is rapidly learning to think in global terms, understanding that our species cannot be separated from the planetary biosphere. It realizes that nationalist power struggles are becoming increasingly obsolete and dangerous, and that war is no longer an option for us. It regards our weapons and the colossal sums of money spent on them and on arms sales as something truly obscene. It sees population growth as one of the greatest threats to the survival of our species, as well as millions of other species and the well-being of the planet in general. The deep malaise in society may help us to grow beyond the current secular mindset and beyond the religions of the past which carry so much dead wood, towards a new spirituality which unifies the two great archetypes of life in a sacred marriage of spirit and nature. This new spirituality, which incorporates the best aspect of the great spiritual traditions of the past, including the indigenous traditions, could open the door to a new understanding of our role in a mind-blowing cosmic drama. Many people are discovering that the experience of spirit is utterly different from what they had accepted as truth in the past. In these discoveries, there is no division of God. There is nothing outside God. God, as Meister Eckhart realized, is all cosmic life. Cosmic consciousness. I remember how excited I was to discover this passage in Bede Griffith's book, Return to the Center. The evolution of matter from the beginning leads to the evolution of consciousness in man. It is the universe itself which becomes conscious in man. It is the inner movement of the spirit, immanent in nature, which brings about the evolution of matter and life into consciousness. And the same spirit at work in human consciousness, latent in every man, is always at work leading to divine life. His words, like Aurobindo's in his extraordinary book, The Life Divine, and Teilhard de Chardin's vision of humanity moving towards what he called the Omega point, helped me to see that the evolution of life on this planet is like a plant, an organic growth, which has its roots in an unknown depth. Its flowering is a potential within us, something that we have still to experience, that only a few pioneers of consciousness have experienced. Again, it is something which is unfolding and evolving from within over millions of years, as the potential form of an oak is contained within an acorn. We cannot know the final form until we have grown into it, but we can begin to understand the process of evolution which has formed us and begin consciously to cooperate with it. Precisely as these three greatest sages of the last century have suggested, spirit may always have been immanent or active in this dimension of reality, leading us to the ultimate revelation that answers Kepler's question at the beginning of this chapter, and tells us that in both our spiritual and physical substance, we are of the essence of divinity. Everything we can see, perceive, and reflect on is of that essence. From the perspective of spirit, it has brought into being this material dimension of reality in order to extend the experience of itself, to come to know itself through all the facets of life it has created, including our species, which is the only one at present capable of consciously recognizing it. Teilhard's understanding of the process of evolution, showing the rising tide of consciousness embedded in the life processes of the earth, is one of the most enthralling ideas of our time. But, he asks, will this universal spirit of evolution flower in time to ensure that, arrived at the point of superhumanity, we avoid dehumanizing ourselves? That is the question that confronts us at this perilous time. Our consciousness is now poised at the threshold of the encounter with cosmic consciousness. The invisible field that relates us to galactic life resonates with the call to relationship with it, and many people are responding to this call. There is a new perception of life pouring into the culture through many thousands of individuals, the perception of the universe as an organic, sacred, and living whole, with ourselves as conscious participants in that living whole. we seem to be reaching the point where we can experience cosmic consciousness, cosmic mind, or cosmic soul, I use these terms interchangeably, as the greater field or ground from which our consciousness derives and in which it participates. Could this new yet very ancient idea transform our relationships with each other, as well as with the earth and the vast entity of the cosmos, in whose life our lives participate? Every mystical tradition says that at the core of our being we are one with the divine. We are one with the immensity we contemplate. Each teaches that the eye of the heart, the eye which perceives with gnosis or insight into the nature of reality, can only slowly open to awareness of this mystery. The ground has to be well prepared to hold the revelation of this vision, and the preparation for it requires much time for contemplation, as well as a growing respect and love for all aspects of life. What seems to be happening now is that a new, or perhaps very ancient understanding of spirit is dawning on us. Although it is not yet fully conscious, the realization that our brain acts both as a receiver and transmitter for a greater field beyond our normal range of awareness is leading us to the point where we may be able to say, as Arjuna says to Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, "Thou art the knower within me, and the one to be known. By thee alone this universe is pervaded. Overjoyed am I to see what I have never seen before." In the light of this different understanding, spirituality invites us to focus more on the experience of illumination and insight than on faith and belief, although belief may initially be a path which can lead to illumination. Many people in the West are discovering through the direct revelation of spirit that the experience of spirit is utterly different from what they had accepted as truth in the past. In these discoveries, there is no division of God. There is nothing outside God. God is quite simply life. Nor is there any separation between ourselves and God, except our inability to experience reality as it is. During the solar era, we have learned to think of spirit and matter as separate, but now we may be able to see that there is no essential separation between them. The seen and unseen dimensions of reality are aspects of the whole and are continually interacting with each other, flowing into each other. We need an image of God which is related to these insights. Of all the challenges we have to face, this is one of the most difficult, because it means that we have to relinquish a structure of thought or meta-narrative by which we have lived for millennia. The mystics of all the great cultures of the past discovered that our consciousness can interact with the invisible field or ground they named variously as God, Brahman, the Tao, or light, divine darkness, and the void. In our normal state, we cannot initiate or perceive this interaction, but this does not mean it does not exist. The Vedas, the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, the Jewish mystical tradition of Kabbalah, the Christian and Sufi mystics all say that spirit can ultimately only be known or apprehended experientially, and that spirit is omnipresent, at once transcendent to and immanent within the forms of life. There is no better text to describe this fusion of the human and the divine than the Bhagavad Gita. Here is Krishna speaking to Arjuna. I am the one source of all. The evolution of all comes from me. I am beginningless, unborn, the Lord of all worlds. I am the soul which dwells in the heart of all things. I am the beginning, the middle, and the end of all that lives. I am the seed of all things that are, and no being that moves or moves not can ever be without me. I don't think we can really understand ourselves unless we understand the history of the evolution of consciousness and begin to bring together the different branches of knowledge that have developed with such extraordinary rapidity during the last 100 or so years and have become separated from each other. As we discover this incredible story, the realization is dawning that we are participating in a cosmic consciousness or intelligence which is co-inherent with every particle of our being and every particle of matter. If we connect these ideas to God, then God or Spirit or Divine Mind is not something transcendent to ourselves. We are co-inherent with it, at the very heart of it. To co-inhere means to be together, to abide together. This realization calls for a huge shift of awareness and a fundamental change in our values. If God or Spirit is not something separate from ourselves, something transcendent to nature and planetary life, but is the intelligence and energy of the life process itself, flaring forth at every instant into every region of this vast universe as well as in ourselves, then how we treat so-called inanimate matter, planetary life, and each other becomes a matter of how we are treating God. It transforms obedience to God's commands into love and respect for God's creation, including ourselves, our neighbor, and most importantly, our enemy. It is clear to me from my study of visionary experience in many cultures that a visionary is aware of the reality of worlds and presences inaccessible to our normal state of consciousness. I am absolutely certain through my own experience and my study of visionary experience that a wider, deeper consciousness than our own is trying to make itself known to us. It has been doing so for millennia. As long as this dimension of consciousness is denied existence and dissociated from our own, it will act in the manner of an unconscious autonomous complex, influencing us in all sorts of ways, some of them negative and destructive, until it finally attracts our attention. As long as we believe that consciousness begins and ends with the physical brain, we will never reach what we are capable of becoming. People who are in conscious communion with metaphysical reality. In his book, Cosmic Consciousness, Richard Buck describes the experiences of individuals who have had that opening to cosmic consciousness and sees these as forerunners of a more advanced race that is slowly coming into being. He himself had such an experience that changed his life and his understanding. Because this passage means so much to me and has helped me to change my own understanding, I would like to share it with readers who may not know of it. I had spent the evening in 1872 in England, in a great city, with two friends, reading and discussing Wordsworth, Shelley, Keats, Browning, and especially Whitman. We parted at midnight. I had a long drive in a hansom to my lodging. My mind, deeply under the influence of the ideas, images, and emotions called up by the reading and talk, was calm and peaceful. I was in a state of quiet, almost passive enjoyment, not actually thinking, but letting ideas, images, and emotions flow of themselves, as it were, through my mind. All at once, without warning of any kind, I found myself wrapped in a flame-colored cloud. For an instant I thought of fire, an immense conflagration somewhere close by in that great city. The next, I knew that the fire was within myself. Directly afterward, there came upon me a sense of exultation, of immense joyousness, accompanied or immediately followed by an intellectual illumination impossible to describe. Among other things, I did not merely come to believe, but I saw that the universe is not composed of dead matter, but is, on the contrary, a living presence. I became conscious in myself of eternal life. It was not a conviction that I would have eternal life, but a consciousness that I possessed eternal life then. I saw that all men are immortal, that the cosmic order is such that without any peradventure all things work together for the good of each and all, that the foundation principle of the world, of all the worlds, is what we call love, and that the happiness of each and all is in the long run absolutely certain. The vision lasted a few seconds and was gone, but the memory of it and the sense of the reality of what it taught has remained during the quarter of a century which has since elapsed. I knew that what the vision showed me was true. I had attained to a point of view from which I saw that it must be true. That view, that conviction, I may say that consciousness, has never, even during periods of the deepest oppression, been lost. To reunite with the ground from which we have come, thereby facilitating the further evolution of cosmic consciousness, is one of the most exciting quests that I can imagine. To discover that spirit, so long projected onto a transcendent creator remote from our world, is the quintessential consciousness which is awaiting discovery both in nature and in ourselves, is one of the greatest revelations it is possible to experience. The other revelation, no less overwhelming, is that we have the extraordinary responsibility of helping spirit to become conscious in ourselves. It may be that cosmic consciousness has waited eons for us to reach the point where more than a handful of individuals could awaken to this revelation. To respond to what is happening at the deepest level, to enter a new phase of our evolutionary journey, we have to create the vessels to hold the new wine that is now pouring into our culture through the awakening consciousness of many thousands, even millions of individuals.
Interlude 2, The Way of the Tao. There is a very ancient spiritual tradition which offers a feminine balance to masculine solar consciousness, one of the few surviving cultural legacies which point to the deep intelligence of lunar culture. I was fortunate enough to have as a godfather a man who had lived for decades in China. I was able to spend many hours with him on my return from my journeys to the East. In his old age, he even looked like a Chinese sage, and he taught me about Taoism, showing me many precious manuscripts and paintings he had brought back from his sojourn in China. He told me never to forget the wisdom of the Taoist sages, explaining that they had discovered how to develop the mind without losing touch with the soul, and this is why an understanding of their philosophy, China's inestimable gift to humanity, was so important. In particular, he mentioned the genius of a poet of the Tang dynasty called Wang Wei. In the deep bamboo forest I sit alone. Loudly I sing and tune my lute. The forest is so thick that no one knows about it. Only the bright moon comes to shine upon me. Whereas the West imagined the creative ground of being as a transcendent father, Taoism, more subtly and comprehensively than any other spiritual tradition, nurtured the quintessence of the feminine as a primordial mother, keeping alive the ancient feeling of relationship with nature as the manifest expression of this mysterious ground. There was something formless yet complete that existed before heaven and earth, without sound, without substances, dependent on nothing, unchanging, all-pervading, unfailing. One may think of it as the mother of all things under heaven. Its true name we do not know. The elusive essence of Taoism is expressed in the Tao Te Ching, the only known work of the great sage Lao Tzu, born circa 604 BC, who, legend says, was persuaded to write down the 81 sayings by one of his disciples when, reaching the end of his life, he had embarked on his last journey to the mountains of the West. The word Tao means the fathomless source, the one, the deep. Te is the way the Tao comes into being, growing organically like a plant from the deep ground or source of life, from within outwards. Ching is the slow, patient shaping of that process through the activity of a creative intelligence within nature that is expressed as the organic patterning within all instinctual life, a kind of cosmic DNA. The Tao does nothing, yet nothing is left undone. No group of people has understood the indivisibility of spirit and nature better than the Taoist sages of China. None has entered more deeply into the soul of nature and understood and respected the relationship between body, soul, and spirit. Observation and contemplation over thousands of years brought them the insight that the body exists within the wider matrix of nature, and nature within the wider soul of the cosmos. They understood that the boundless energy of the universe that they call Qi flows through everything that exists. Through the flow of that energy, everything is connected to everything else. Their insight might be summed up in the words of the modern teaching of Qigong: I am within the universe, and the universe is within me. The origins of Taoism come from the shamanic practices and the oral traditions that were developed as long ago as the Neolithic era. Its earliest written expression was the Book of Changes, or I Ching, a book of divination consisting of 64 oracles, thought to date to 3000 to 1200 BC, and still consulted today. The tradition of Taoism was transmitted from master to pupil by a succession of shaman sages, many of whom were sublime artists and poets. From the source, which is both everything and nothing, and whose image is the circle, came heaven and earth, yang and yin, the male and female principles whose dynamic interaction brings into being the world we see and maintains it in balance. The Tao is both the source and the creative process of life that flows from it, imagined as a mother who is the root of heaven and earth, beyond all, yet within all, giving birth to all, containing all, nurturing all. The way of Tao is to reconnect with the mother ground or source, to be in it, like a bird in the air or a fish in the sea, in touch with it while living in the midst of the myriad forms that the source takes in manifestation. It is to become aware of the presence of the Tao in everything, to discover and observe its rhythm and its dance, learning to trust it, no longer interfering with the flow of life by manipulating, directing, resisting, controlling. It is to develop a relationship with and intuitive awareness of a mystery which only gradually unveils itself. Following the way of Tao requires a turning towards the hidden withinness of things, a receptivity to the unseen through contemplation of the seen in relationship with the unseen, enough time to reflect on what is inconceivable and indescribable beyond the reach of mind or intellect, that can only be felt, intuited, experienced at ever deeper depth. Action taken from this position of balance and freedom will be aligned to the harmony of the Tao, and will therefore embody its mysterious power and wisdom, enabling it to act in the world without attachment to action. Enlightenment, according to Lao Tzu and Chuang-Tzu, one of Taoism's greatest sages, uncovers unknown powers of the mind which lie beyond the threshold of normal consciousness. Sudden enlightenment breaks through the habitual structure of consciousness and opens the mind to the powers and insight imprisoned in the depths of the soul. The Taoists never separated nature from spirit, consciously preserving the instinctive knowledge that although it manifests as a duality, life is one. No people observe nature more passionately and minutely than these Chinese sages, or reach so deeply into the hidden heart of life, describing the life and form of insects, animals, birds, flowers, trees, wind, water, planets and stars. They felt the continuous flow and flux of life as an underlying energy that was without beginning or end, that was, like water, never static, never still, never fixed in separate things or events, but always in a state of movement, a state of changing, becoming, and relating. They called the art of going with the flow of this energy Wu Wei, not doing. Wu means not or none. Wei means doing, making, striving after goals. Understanding it as the art of relinquishing control, not trying to force or manipulate life, but, through an act of conscious observation and connection, attuning themselves to the underlying rhythm and ever-changing modes of its being. The Taoists would never have entertained the idea of targets or goals, other than the mastery of the medium, poetry or painting, through which they expressed their relationship with the Tao. The stilling of the surface of the mind that is preoccupied with the 10,000 things brings into being a deeper, more complete mind, and a meditative state of consciousness and creative power that they named Te, which, enable them not to interfere with life, but, in their words, to enter the forest without moving the grass, to enter the water without raising a ripple. The mind of man searches outward all day. The further it reaches, the more it opposes itself. Only those who look inward can censor their passions and cease their thoughts. Being able to cease their thoughts, their minds become tranquil. To tranquilize the mind is to nourish one's spirit. To nourish the spirit is to return to nature. They cherished the Tao with their brushstrokes, observing how it flowed into the patterns of cloud and mist between earth and mountain peak, or the changing rhythm of air currents and the eddying water of rivers and streams, the exquisite opening of plum blossom in spring, the rustling dance of bamboo and willow. They listened to the sounds that can only be heard in the silence. They expressed their experience of the Tao in their paintings, their poetry, their temples, in remote mountain retreats and gardens, and in their way of living, which was essentially one of withdrawal from the world, to a sanctuary in the heart of nature, where they could live a simple contemplative life, concentrating on perfecting their brushstrokes in calligraphy and painting, and their subtlety of expression in the art of poetry. Humility, reverence, patience, insight, and wisdom were the qualities that they sought to cultivate. Out of non-being, being is born. Out of silence, the writer produces a song. The Taoist artist or poet intuitively reached into the secret essence of what he was observing, making himself one with it, then inviting it to speak through him, so releasing the dynamic harmony within it. He imposed nothing of himself on it, but reflected the soul of what he was observing through the highly developed skills that he had cultivated over a lifetime of practice. Through the perfection of his art, he did not define or explain the Tao, which, as Chuang-Tzu said, cannot be conveyed either by words or by silence, but called it into being so that it could be experienced by the beholder. The Tao flows through the whole work as a presence, at once transcendent in its mystery and immanent in its form. The distillation of what the Taoist sages discovered is bequeathed to us in the beauty and wisdom of their painting, poetry, and philosophy, and in their profound understanding of the relationship between the observer and what is observed, and the eternal ground that underlies and enfolds them. In a treatise on painting, Chuang Hui writes, "Only he who reaches reality can follow nature's spontaneity and be aware of the subtlety of things, and his mind will be absorbed by them. His brush will secretly be in harmony with movement and quiescence, and all forms will issue forth. Appearances and substance are caught in one motion as the life breath reverberates through them. He who is ignorant of reality becomes a slave of passion, and his nature will be distorted by externalities. He sinks into confusion and is disturbed by the thoughts of gain or loss. He is nothing more than a prisoner of brush and ink. How can he speak of genuine works of heaven and earth?" Whenever I look at one of the great Taoist paintings of the Tang or Sung dynasties, or read a Taoist poem, I find myself subtly permeated by them. They evoke a state of calm, helping me to let go of the things that normally distract the mind, the preoccupation with the 10,000 things that they called dust. They relate me instantaneously to the source or ground which unites everything. There is one particular story that I love, recounted to Jung by Richard Wilhelm, who gave us the first translation of the I Ching. Once, not long ago, there was a great drought in a province of China. The situation was catastrophic. The land was utterly parched and the crops were failing. Many people were facing the prospect of starvation. Desperate, they tried to produce rainfall by performing all the religious rites they knew. The Catholics made processions, the Protestants made prayers, and the Chinese burned joss sticks and shot off guns to frighten away the demons of the drought, but with no result. Finally, the people decided to send for a renowned rainmaker who lived in a far distant province. After some days, a withered old man appeared. The only thing he asked for was a quiet little hut somewhere, and there he locked himself in for 3 days. On the 4th day the clouds gathered and the rain poured down. As a result, the town filled with rumors about the wonderful rainmaker, and the people went to the hut of the rainmaker and asked him what he had done during the 3 days that had caused the rain to fall on the 4th. He said, "I come from another country where things are in order. Here they are out of order. They are not as they should be, under the ordinance of heaven. Therefore the whole country was not in Tao, and I also was not in the natural order of things, because I was in a disordered country. So I had to wait 3 days until I was back in Tao, and then, naturally, the rain came." To let go of the need for striving and control, to rest in the quietness of mind and humility of heart that the Taoist sage embodies, is to live in a state of instinctive spontaneity they named Su Jian, a being in the moment that can only exist as in earliest childhood, when the effort to adapt to collective values is unknown or of no importance. What exists is what is. There is no need to change it by imposing one's will or trying to manipulate circumstances. Change will come about by changing the quality of one's own being, by consciously reconnecting moment by moment with the presence of the source, particularly in moments of confusion or stress. To feel what needs to be said without striving to say it, to speak from the heart in as few words as possible, to act when action is required, responding to the needs of the moment without attachment to the fruits of action. This was the essence of the Taoist vision. It is a response to life that is essentially gentle, balanced, dynamic, and wise. It is still reflected today in the faces and demeanor of modern sages who live in the sacred mountains of China, where, for centuries, retreats have been built as places of contemplation in a landscape of utter stillness and breathtaking beauty. The wide pond expands like a mirror. Heavenly light and cloud shadows play upon it. How does such clarity occur? It is because it contains the living stream from the fountain.
Part 6. Stellar Consciousness. Transformation and Final Participation. Chapter 18. The Great Work of Alchemy, the Process of the Soul's Transmutation. Imagination is the star in man, the celestial and supercelestial body. Rulin the Lexicographer. Hidden within man, there exists such a heavenly and divine light which cannot be placed in man from without, but must emerge from within. Zosimus of Panopolis. Join the male and the female, and you will find what is sought. Maria Prophetessa. To all of us falls one heritage, wisdom. All of us inherit of it equally, but one man makes the best of his heritage, and another does not. One buries it, lets it die, and passes over it. Another draws profit from it, one more, one less. According to how we invest, use, and administer our heritage, we obtain much or little from it, and yet it belongs to all of us, and it is in all of us. Paracelsus. Alchemy flows beneath the surface of Western civilization like a river of gold, preserving its images and its insights for us, so that we could one day understand our presence on this planet better than we do. Alchemy builds a rainbow bridge between the human and the divine, the seen and unseen dimensions of reality, between matter and spirit. The cosmos calls to us to become aware that we participate in its life, that everything is sacred and connected. One life, one spirit. Alchemy responds to that call. It asks us to develop cosmic consciousness, to awaken the divine spark of our consciousness and reunite it with the invisible soul of the cosmos. It changes our perception of reality and answers the questions, who are we and why are we here? It refines and transmutes the base metal of our understanding so that we, evolved from the very substance of the stars, can know that we participate in the mysterious ground of spirit while living in this physical dimension of reality. The royal art. Alchemy has been called the royal art. What does this mean? It means that each one of us carries latent within his or her nature the royal value, the greater, finer, more complete or whole person we are capable of becoming. Alchemy is about the process of redeeming or giving birth to that royal value, the quintessence of our nature, assisting it to come to full consciousness and to bring us to wholeness or spiritual maturity. It is the process which transmutes the volatile matter of our being into finer and finer elements. It tells the story of the rescue of spirit, buried or lost in the forms of its creation, which needs our help to emerge from its place of exile. In entering the alchemical great work, we become the co-redeemers of spirit, working hand in hand with spirit to release, redeem, and reunite with the divine cosmic ground of our psychic life and all of nature. Alchemy is a process of revelation and transmutation. The aim of the alchemist was to rescue the living gold, the treasure of spirit buried in the underworld of his soul. Zosimus of Panopolis, living in Egypt in the 3rd century AD, said, "I swear to you that if you do this work properly, you will one day have a river of flowing gold." We are embedded in the world of spirit. Our physical bodies carry cosmic elements that have come from the stars. We are the living embodiment of spirit, but we don't know this. Alchemy is about a slow and arduous process of attunement to this realization. Arduous because the evolution of consciousness takes eons of earth time, and it is so difficult to recover and understand what has been lost over the centuries. Many deeply imprinted beliefs and habits impede this understanding, and it is hard to dismantle the structures of belief that have been built up over millennia. European alchemy, the inheritor of Egyptian, Greek, and Arab alchemy, is the Western tradition of inner psychic transmutation. Like the tradition of Kabbalah in the West and Kundalini Yoga in the East, it assists the process of reuniting us with our source. The image of gold. Gold is the image that comes to mind when alchemy is mentioned. Gold, or the mysterious philosopher's stone. This gold or stone was said to be not only a cure for all disease and sickness, but was thought to represent the awakened subtle or spiritual body that would act as a vehicle for the soul in the worlds beyond this one. The gold or stone symbolizes the gift of wisdom, insight or gnosis, and the power to heal human suffering, as well as awareness of the presence of the subtle soul body. The alchemist said, there are 2 categories in this art, namely, seeing with the eye and understanding with the heart, and this is the hidden stone, which is fitly called a gift of God, and this divine stone is the heart and tincture of gold, which the philosophers seek. The symbol of the alchemical gold was the circle. In many images and symbols which have their origin in Egypt, the alchemical quest describes the process which transmutes what we are into what we are capable of becoming, transmutes us from base metal into gold, bringing us from a state of ignorance and fragmentation into one of enlightenment and wholeness. It gradually opens our eyes to an incandescent vision of reality. It brings into being a deep state of communion between our consciousness and the invisible dimension of spirit. So the alchemist said, alchemy is not merely an art or science to teach metallic transmutation, so much as a true and solid science that teaches how to know the center of all things, which in the divine language is called the spirit of life. At the present time, the neglect of our inner life and our deepest instinctual needs has led to the situation where, as in the Grail legend, the territory of the soul is in the grip of a terrible drought. Few people understand any more what the landscape and the language of the soul are like. Few can read the images that are like hieroglyphs whose key has been lost. An understanding of the basic concepts of alchemy can help us to reconnect with the soul and with the hidden ground of life. The alchemical images yield their secret to those who contemplate them. The need to awaken. The evolution of human consciousness on this planet is a very slow gradient of ascent from unconsciousness to self-consciousness and ultimately to awakened consciousness. There are many setbacks and long periods of stagnation and incubation. The whole of humanity suffers because the increase of consciousness is so slow and the transformation needed to diminish human suffering and ignorance so difficult to implement. Now it seems that because of the turmoil in the world and the harm to the planet caused by our unconscious behavior, our evolution is being accelerated, taking us to a point where we have to make the choice between transformation and annihilation. It is as if, during the last 70 years or so, we have been placed in an alchemical retort, forced to live through the fire of transformation, for the most part unconsciously. The more individuals who are able to awaken to this process of transformation and cooperate with it, the less suffering there will be for the whole body of humanity, because essentially we are one life. Collectively, humanity in the last century and this one has been through a fiery calcinatio, an alchemical term for the first stage of the alchemical process. We have witnessed the images of incineration in the gas ovens of Auschwitz, the firebombing of Coventry, Hamburg, and Dresden, the obliteration of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, death by napalm, depleted uranium, and white phosphorus bombs, the horrific fiery collapse of the Twin Towers, the bombing of Baghdad, and all the senseless acts using explosives to destroy lives. These events, combined with the suffering and destitution created by wars, by the sale of arms, by corruption, greed, and fear, urge all of us to do whatever we can to contribute to the process of awakening and transformation that is now engaging the whole of humanity. Given the default position of governments which have to act on behalf of national interests, only individuals or groups of individuals can hope to make some contribution towards change. Yet, because the crisis we face is so grave, the very limitations and ineptitude of governments and the general chaos of the financial markets are accelerating the awakening of people all over the world. In relation to the lives of those whose desperate concern is survival, this inner work may seem irrelevant, even absurd. Yet if change in the world situation is ever to come about, it can only come through an increase in the number of concerned and committed individuals engaging in the awakening and transformation of their own consciousness, and giving expression to that transformation in some form of service to the world. This service may take the form of the struggle for freedom from oppressive regimes. It may seek to alleviate the hunger and deprivation in areas where starvation stalks the lives of millions, or the liberation of women from oppression and servitude to religious beliefs and social customs, or the protection of the planet from the failure of governments to take collective action on its behalf. Whatever form it takes, its inspiration will spring from an awakened and compassionate heart. The roots of alchemy. Alchemy is at least 4,000 years old and has deep roots in Egyptian, Babylonian, and Greek, as well as Chinese, Indian, and Persian civilizations. Some scholars think that the word alchemy comes from an Arabic word meaning the preparation of silver and gold. Others that it means black earth. The word alchemy, because it contains the prefix al, suggests an Arab derivation, but the word chemia points to a connection with the Egyptian word chem, which was a word used to describe Egypt, whose black earth was created by the annual inundations of the Nile. The great obelisks which stood gleaming in the courtyards of the Egyptian temples were once covered with electrum, which was an alloy of silver and gold. But certain Egyptians knew how to apply this science to the soul. They discovered how to make an alloy of its two basic elements, the solar gold of the masculine element and the lunar silver of the feminine one. There have been men and women in every culture, in Egypt and Babylonia, in Persia, Tibet, India and China, in mountains and forests remote from the centers of civilization, who have transmitted their knowledge of ways of relating to the dimension of spirit, ancient ways that until recently were the closely guarded secret of a handful of initiates. There are two aspects to alchemy. One approach is through seeing the soul as the alchemical vessel of transformation. The other is the creation of physical gold. Alchemy is a science, both in the sense that it has a methodology and in the sense that it gives astonishing insights into the nature of matter and our own nature. The work of alchemists in different cultures laid the foundations of modern science, chemistry, biology, physics on the one hand, and psychology on the other. They also developed the knowledge of how to distill the essence of plants for the purposes of healing, leading to the sciences of homeopathy and herbal medicine. Much precious knowledge transmitted from earlier shamanic cultures was lost because so many transmitters of this knowledge were murdered by the religious fanaticism that has so regrettably prolonged the suffering of humanity. Even today, in our supposedly enlightened times, we can still see the deep suspicion of alternative therapies and herbal medicines, and the ongoing attempts to disparage and eliminate them, on the dubious suggestion that their efficacy cannot be proven by scientific methods, and that therefore they may even be dangerous. In Europe, alchemy had a great age of flowering in the 16th and 17th centuries, although there were well-known alchemists in earlier times and other places. Just as the city of Prague was the center of European alchemy in the 16th and 17th centuries, so the thriving city of Alexandria was the center of alchemy in Hellenistic times. Recently discovered manuscripts, among them Zosimus of Panopolis in the 3rd century AD, show that from earliest times alchemy was understood as the art of soul transmutation, not the literal transmutation of metals into gold. Hence the alchemical saying, "Our gold is not the common gold." The origin of alchemy lies in the shamanic traditions of the lunar cultures, which kept alive the vital connection between the visible and invisible worlds. There has always been a chain of teachers, known as the Golden Chain or Catena Aurea, who have transmitted this knowledge from generation to generation over thousands of years. Two great streams of alchemical knowledge, one flowing from ancient Egypt and Babylonia, with their highly advanced knowledge of astronomy and mathematics, and the other from Arabia and Islamic Spain, came together in Europe in the late Middle Ages and Renaissance. There were some 4,000 alchemists working in Europe between 1200 and 1650, and they created dozens of extraordinary and in some cases very beautiful alchemical texts. Alchemy, like Kabbalah, was a visionary and contemplative tradition, handed down from teacher to pupil, and indeed many alchemists were Kabbalists and vice versa. In attempting to understand alchemy, it is helpful to have some knowledge of Kabbalah. All were astrologers, for the great work required the knowledge of the alignment of the alchemical processes and the physical elements undergoing transmutation, with the position and relationship of certain planets and stars. Among the most famous Egyptian alchemists were the mythical figures of Hermes Trismegistus and Maria Prophetessa, a Jewess from Alexandria, from whose name comes the bain-marie, or pan of water, which even today is used by chefs to heat dishes gently in the oven or to keep them warm. Later in Europe, there were great Jewish as well as Christian alchemists, among them the brilliant and controversial physician Paracelsus. We owe them an immense debt of gratitude, and it is helpful to invoke their presence and ask them for assistance in understanding their writings. Here are the names of some of the alchemists who were part of this golden chain. Jeber or Jabir, who lived in the 8th century at the court of Harun al-Rashid in Baghdad. Rhazes, who lived in Persia in the 9th century. Roger Bacon, who lived in 13th century England. Albertus Magnus, who lived in 13th century Germany. Arnold of Villanova, who lived in 13th century Spain. Raymond Lull, who lived in Dea, Mallorca, in the 13th to the 14th century. Nicolas Flamel, who lived from 1330 to 1413 in Paris. Basil Valentine, who was German and who lived in the 17th century. Salomon Trismosin, who lived in the 16th century and was the author of an exquisite manuscript, the Splendor Solis, one of the great treasures of the British Library. Paracelsus, who lived from 1493 to 1541 and was Swiss. Gerhard Dorn, who lived in the 16th century and who was Belgian. And finally, Giordano Bruno, who lived from 1548 to 1600 and was burnt at the stake in 1600 in Rome. We also owe a debt of gratitude to Jung, a modern alchemist, for without his rediscovery of alchemy, much that he discovered might have remained unknown to the general public. Jung came to study alchemy through 2 dreams recounted in his autobiography, Memories, Dreams, Reflections. These prompted him to collect many books on alchemy and to make an inventory of all the images and descriptions in them. It could be said that through his understanding of alchemy, he reconnected solar with lunar consciousness and the left hemisphere of the brain with the right hemisphere. He recovered the ancient shamanic way of knowing of the lunar era that the alchemists had managed to keep alive through centuries of persecution. He realized that the images of alchemy were similar to those in the dreams of his patients, and that they described a process of inner psychic transformation, which he named the individuation process. Where Christianity taught that the Redeemer is outside us and that our redemption as Christians has been assured by Christ's sacrificial death, Jung realized that the secret science of alchemy taught that the alchemist can become the redeemer of the lost aspect of spirit hidden within himself and nature, working with spirit to accomplish this redemption. Alchemy gives great importance and significance to the individual, since the divine drama of redemption is consummated in and through us, not accomplished on our behalf. It is an awesome and heroic task. Each one of us carries the mystery of the incarnation of spirit in this physical dimension of reality. In the rich library of alchemical images, we are looking at spirit's manifestation and transformation of itself, as well as its desire for recognition and communication with us. Our human consciousness, our soul, is the vessel in which this mysterious transformation takes place. That is why Jung recognized that alchemy is a sacred rite, or what he called an opus divinum. Jung realized that when the alchemists spoke of the philosophical gold, they were referring to the true gold of the spirit, which could, through repeated distillations, washings, and cleansings, be freed from the dross that had accrued to it in the course of human evolution. From the alchemist Gerhard Dorn, Jung took the idea of the unus mundus, the unifying cosmic ground in which both matter and psyche participate, and whose connecting substratum gives rise to synchronicities, as well as to miraculous healings, visionary experiences, and sudden illuminations. He said that alchemy had 2 aims, the rescue of the human soul and the salvation of the cosmos. His last and most profound book on the alchemical great work is Mysterium Conjunctionis. After he had finished the first draft, he had an accident, followed by a serious illness, and sensing that he was on the threshold of death, had the great visions of the conjunctio which he describes in his autobiography, Memories, Dreams, Reflections. An alchemical dream. I was first attracted to alchemy when I studied medieval history at Oxford, and with great excitement read about the alchemists of the Middle Ages. A striking visionary dream when I was 28 and had just embarked on a Jungian analysis alerted me to a spiritual journey I was unconsciously, at that time, making. It was only many years later, when I read Jung's writings on alchemy, that I recognized its alchemical symbolism. This is the dream. I am in a garden, walled and square, with a central wall bisecting it through the middle. In one part of the garden is a beautiful blossoming apple or cherry tree. Beyond the garden, the whole horizon of the world is ringed by burning cities. I am crawling on my stomach along the central wall, which is ablaze with fire. As I crawl slowly and with great difficulty along the wall, I look up towards another wall in front of me, forming a T-junction with the one I am on. Appearing over the top of this, as if standing on a ladder on the other side, there is a man wearing a strange hat that falls to one side. He is waiting for me to pass through the fire and come to meet him. As I inch my way along the wall towards him, I realize that he is the gardener, the keeper of the garden. I am still assimilating the message of that dream and another later dream described in the last chapter, where a stone spoke to me, saying, "Help me, help me." I discovered later that the hat worn by the gardener of my dream was the Phrygian cap once worn by the devotees of the goddess Cybele, and later by the medieval alchemists. I came across a sculpture on the outside of Notre Dame in Paris of a man wearing precisely this cap, illustrated in a book on alchemy by Fulcanelli called Le Mystère des Cathédrales. Only through my study of alchemy did I begin to sense the meaning of the dream of the water, which had haunted me for so many decades, ever since those early channeled messages. Only in alchemy did I find the reference to the divine water, and understood that this water was the invisible sea of being in which we are all immersed without being aware of it. Immersed, as Mechthild of Magdeburg, who lived in the 13th century, describes it in her book, The Flowing Light of the Godhead. Like a bird in the air, like a fish in the sea. Very gradually, over many years of wondering, I began to understand the divine water as an image that mirrored the deep ground of the soul to the surface personality that is unaware of its existence. But I felt it was more than this. It was the longing of that deep ground to bring humanity to conscious awareness of the sacredness of life, of the unity and perfection of the cosmic order, and our potential role in creating a conscious relationship with this sacred order. I began to understand alchemy as a shamanic method leading to a direct encounter with spirit. As I learned more, I saw that alchemy throws a bridge between the seen and unseen dimensions of life. One of the great maxims of the alchemists, following the words written on the emerald tablet, said to have been written by Hermes Trismegistus, was, "As above, so below." Their aim was to assist the marriage of two dimensions of reality, between the unseen reality of the highest order, the macrocosm, and the visible manifest world, as well as our own human organism, the microcosm. Squaring the circle by uniting these two dimensions of reality leads to the birth of the divine child, the awakened consciousness that is the treasure, the pearl of great price, and the ultimate fruit of this union. So the alchemist said, "Whoever shall make the hidden manifest knoweth the whole work." The importance of myth. Like the Rosetta Stone, the greatest myths contain a meaning which can be decoded from the symbolic imagery that conceals it and used as a key to a deeper understanding of life. In the evocative words of the great mythologist Joseph Campbell, myth is the secret opening through which the inexhaustible energies of the cosmos pour into human cultural manifestation. Certain myths have the power to heal and transform if their images are understood in relation to the soul. In symbolic images and allegorical stories, they tell the hidden workings of the spirit within the matrix of the soul. They chronicle the evolution of human consciousness and the tremendous struggle for greater consciousness through search, suffering, and heroic endeavor that the human story represents. Such myths can be applied as much to the life of an individual as to the life of a culture, or to the whole evolutionary journey of humanity on this planet. They describe what has to be accomplished over and over again if humanity is to reach the goal that Spirit intends. They tell the story of the quest for a deeper, more complete relationship with life that is described as the treasure, the supreme value. The treasure is not power, nor any kind of supremacy over anything or anyone. The treasure is an enlightened state of being, or, in the more familiar language of the West, the wisdom, insight, and compassion that are the fruits of a relationship with the hidden ground of life. Certain myths flow beneath the surface of our lives like a mighty river, connecting our superficial awareness with its roots, ready always when we are ready to well up like a perennial spring whenever we call upon our soul for help. In European civilization, there was a wealth of ideas that had to go underground, since they could only escape persecution by being hidden in metaphor and allegory. Only now are they emerging, having been preserved for the day of their resurrection, by a strong mythological tradition expressed in alchemy on the one hand, and in countless legends and stories, such as the fairy tale of the Sleeping Beauty and the legend of the Holy Grail on the other. The revelations transmitted by awakened individuals in all cultures later become embodied in religious institutions, which gradually lose or exclude elements that are vital to our balance and well-being. A tendency to crystallization, dogmatism, and literalism may cause religions to become fixated in the past, unable to apply their great revelation to the human soul and contemporary events. In the case of the three patriarchal religions, there has been an excessive emphasis on the masculine principle, on theological dogma, and an insistence on belief rather than the transformation of consciousness as the path to God. As chapters 7 and 8 have shown, oppressive social customs became associated with specific beliefs. Alchemy kept alive the shamanic participatory consciousness of the lunar era through some 4,000 years. See chapters 4 and 5. The principal themes of alchemy descend from the great Bronze Age lunar myths of death and regeneration that were celebrated in Egypt, Sumer, Babylonia, and Greece, and were originally related to the annual death and regeneration of the life of the crops. The major themes of alchemy echo the major themes of these great lunar myths. In Sumer, the descent of Inanna. In Egypt, Isis's search for the fragmented body of Osiris. In Babylonia, Ishtar's descent into the underworld and her rescue of her son Tammuz. And in Greece, Demeter's search for her daughter Persephone. Certain themes found in these great lunar myths are related to the transformation of the consciousness in the alchemists. These themes are as follows: the descent into the underworld and the return, the struggle with a superhuman adversary, the quest for a priceless treasure, the rescue of a divine element lost in the underworld, the theme of transformation, the sacred marriage, and the birth of the divine child. In alchemy, the alchemist undertakes the redemption of his own soul and simultaneously of the anima mundi, or hidden feminine aspect of spirit, imprisoned in matter. Alchemy transposes the images and themes of ancient mythology, the rescue of the divine element lost in the underworld, the quest for the treasure, and the image of the sacred marriage, to the human soul. It also incorporates the shamanic tradition of the initiatory death and rebirth involved in the process of becoming a shaman, which is what the alchemist in effect was. The alchemist made the descent into the underworld of his soul to recover the treasure buried in the matter of his instinctual life, in order to give birth to the new value or transformed consciousness. He became, with the help of divine grace, the redeemer of his soul, discovering the revelatory experience of the treasure. Men and women sometimes work together as partners to bring into being the treasure of the alchemical gold, as Nicolas Flamel and his wife Perronel in 14th century Paris, where, amazingly, their house still stands. The partner in the alchemical work was called the Soror Mystica, or Frater Mysticus. There is a fascinating story about Nicolas Flamel. One night he had a dream that an angel came to him. The angel held a book, the book of Abraham the Jew, and spoke these words to Flamel. "Look well at this book, Nicholas. At first you will understand nothing in it, but one day you will see in it that which no other man will be able to see." Not long after having this dream, a man came into Flamel's bookshop carrying a book. Flamel recognized it as the same book the angel had held out to him in his dream. He purchased the book and for 21 years studied its mysterious 21 pages in search of the fundamental secrets of nature. He was one of the few alchemists who, with his wife Perronel, was able to create the physical gold, and with this he endowed many hospitals in Paris, some of which still exist today. He designed his own tomb and covered it with alchemical images. When it was opened years after his death, his body was not there. The quest for a priceless treasure. Alchemy was the secret tradition which taught that the priceless treasure, spoken of in so many myths, lies within our own human nature, unrecognized and neglected, or, putting it the other way round, that we live unknowingly within the field of the treasure, even though our existence in this physical dimension of reality seems so separate, so remote from it. Alchemy gives the treasure many beautiful names which resonate down the centuries. The elixir of life, the philosopher's stone, the heavenly balsam, the flower of immortality, the divine water, and the quintessential gold. The alchemical great work involves a descent into the underworld of the soul in order to recover the lost awareness that the life of nature, matter, and the body is also a manifestation and embodiment of spirit, an insight reflected in the words of the great Indian teacher Sri Aurobindo, "Hidden nature is secret God." Alchemy today invites us to change our attitude to nature and matter and the way we exploit all aspects of planetary life for the exclusive benefit of our species. The great work of alchemy is about recovering the lost lunar sense of participatory awareness and applying it consciously to our relationship with nature. It is about reanimating the imaginative vision, the poetic sensibility, and the heightened awareness or insight which connects us to the unseen ground of being. At the same time, it is about growing into our unique individuality, differentiating ourselves from the deficient collective values that presently direct the political and religious life of society, without in any way seeing ourselves as superior to other people or forcing our views upon them. The alchemist descended into the depths of his soul to undergo a death and rebirth, to transform his consciousness from base metal into gold, to recover the treasure buried in the matter of his instinctual life, and to be reunited with the divine ground, personified by Sophia, the feminine image of divine wisdom. In the vessel of his glass retort, he attempted to transmute metals and chemical substances, but it was the images and dreams that came to him as he did this work which reflected what was taking place in the vessel of his own soul, and alerted him to, then deepened his understanding of, the process of psychic transformation that was taking place within him. The retort acted like a mirror that reflected the processes taking place within the vessel of his soul. He deduced from his observation of these processes that matter and spirit were mysteriously connected with each other. The alchemists had first to bring the primordial life energy into consciousness within them, and then discover how to work with it to transform it and allow it to transform them. In the course of this process of attunement and transformation, the center of gravity within their psyche gradually shifted from the needs and desires of the ego-bound personality to a deeper focus created by a growing relationship with and awareness of spirit in all its manifestations. This process, which in some took many decades and in others was sudden and unexpected, opened the one who was transformed by it to values utterly different from those which govern the world, values associated with the mentality that the alchemists called the old king. As the process transformed their understanding, it awakened them to a new kind of relationship with matter, earth, and cosmos. Ultimately, the soul gave birth to the enlightened consciousness that they named the young king. The alchemist stressed that the work was to be done gently, patiently, allowing it to unfold. To try to achieve this state by force, greed, or ambition was to risk inflation, madness, and death. The young king and the king who needs to die. Alchemy gives us the image of a king who has to die in order that his son may rule in his stead. Many startling alchemical images illustrate the processes which bring about the death of the old king. Those of you who are familiar with the Grail stories will remember the story of the aged king who lies wounded in the groin, waiting for the Redeemer who will free the waters of the soul, so that the wasteland he rules over may be restored to fertility. The texts of European alchemy carried forward the imagery of this medieval story. In particular, there is a beautiful text in Trismegistus's Splendor Solis that accompanies an equally beautiful alchemical picture in the same manuscript, which says, "The king's son lies in the depths of the sea as though dead, but he lives and calls from the deep. Whosoever will free me from the waters and lead me to dry land, him will I prosper with everlasting riches." We can identify the old king, the king who needs to die, with the deficient values that currently control the so-called real world, the values driven by the will to power that have ruled the world throughout the solar era. He can also be identified with our current perception of reality, where, in St. Paul's words, we see through a glass darkly, 1 Corinthians 13:12. We can also identify the old king with an outworn image of spirit that needs to be relinquished in order for a new image, the young king, to emerge from the depths of the soul. As described in the preceding chapter, just as from time to time we have to buy new clothes to replace worn-out ones, so an image of spirit or God, which has long presided over a civilization, may need to die in order for a new image of spirit to come into manifestation. The king's son in the above text personifies the different values generated by a deeper relationship with spirit based on direct spiritual experience rather than belief. 2,000 years ago, Jesus was the young king who brought potential renewal to the culture of that time and the possibility of a transformation of the values governing the real world. 500 years before him, at the beginning of what has been called the Axial Age, the Buddha did the same for his culture in India. St. Francis was to do the same for 13th century Italy, and in my view, Jung did the same for Western culture in the 20th century. Yet still it seems that we have the utmost difficulty in freeing ourselves from the power of the old king, who, at the present time, seems more entrenched than ever. In relation to the collective soul of humanity, the whole world may fall under the spell of the values which characterize the old king and remain under it for centuries, if not millennia. We may risk regression to an inferior psychic state if there is too great an inflexibility on the part of those who are the dominant element in a culture, so that no change is allowed, no new element integrated with the deficient ruling system of values. The extreme example of this would be tyranny in the form of an inflexible political or religious dogma, or the desire for world domination by one nation or one religious group. But this impulse to dominate arises when the conscious personality, symbolized by the old king, is out of touch with the depths. It is then possessed and driven by its shadow, the will to power of the unconscious instinct. Jung warned about the danger of the inflation of the modern mind, saying that every increase in consciousness harbors the danger of inflation. An inflated consciousness, he wrote, is always egocentric and conscious of nothing but its own presence. It is incapable of learning from the past, incapable of understanding contemporary events, and incapable of drawing right conclusions about the future. It is hypnotized by itself and therefore cannot be argued with. It inevitably dooms itself to calamities that must strike it dead. Paradoxically enough, inflation is a regression of consciousness into unconsciousness. This always happens when consciousness takes too many unconscious contents upon itself and loses the faculty of discrimination, the sine qua non of all consciousness. The bigger the crowd, the better the truth, and the greater the catastrophe. The Sacred Marriage. 4,000 years ago, in the courtyards of the great temples on the banks of the Nile, the sacred marriage of goddess and god was celebrated. The theme of the sacred marriage has come down to us in myth, in fairy tales like Cinderella and the Sleeping Beauty, and in the biblical Song of Songs. Alchemy sets the supreme quest for the treasure in the context of a marriage between the solar and lunar aspects of the soul, the fiery gold of the masculine element and the volatile silver of the feminine one, a union between our mind and our soul, our head and our heart, between the solar king and the lunar queen. This marriage also unites the invisible dimension of the subtle world of spirit with the material world of our experience, rendering the latter transparent to spirit. The sacred marriage is the age-old image of this mysterious double union. The alchemists called the consciousness that was the fruit of this inner marriage stellar consciousness, signifying that they had become united with the invisible cosmic ground that is the foundation of the phenomenal world. The alchemists said that in order for consciousness to be transformed from base metal into gold, both king and queen have to undergo a process of dissolution and transformation. The alchemists associated the king with the sun, with gold, sulfur, and the color red. The king today might be identified with the limited consciousness we associate with our rational mind, which may be entirely bound to the perception of reality offered by our senses, and is unaware of a deeper dimension of reality or a deeper dimension of the psyche. The king formulates many goals, but these goals may be unrelated to anything pertaining to the realm of spirit. The images they associated with the queen are the moon, silver, quicksilver or mercury, and the color white. The rose, the lily, the dove, and the swan were also associated with her. Her nature is described as volatile, liquid, watery, and changeable. Related to the inner world of the psyche, the queen is our instinctual soul, whose focus is the heart. At the archetypal level, she represents the cosmic dimension of the anima mundi, the hidden soul of nature, the matrix of our creative energy and the womb of our imagination, which derives ultimately from the soul of the cosmos. Just as the awakened and transformed consciousness of the king is represented by the young king, so the awakened and transformed consciousness of the queen is personified by the young queen. Their union creates the child of the awakened, integrated consciousness, symbolized by the alchemical gold and the other numinous images of the completion of the great work. To awaken the consciousness personified by the king to the values associated with the wisdom of the soul, he has to undergo a symbolic death, vividly described by the shamanic initiation. He makes a descent into the watery realm of the soul, the realm of the emotions, feelings, instincts, that has never been associated with anything of value, and that has been both feared and despised, and has consequently remained largely dissociated from consciousness during the solar era, and therefore undeveloped. The king comes to know the queen intimately, becoming aware of his feelings not as something inferior to his rational mind, but as something like his own mother, something that he has been born from, emerged from, and can now unite with consciously as his bride, the feminine and royal counterpart of himself. By descending into this dimension, overcoming his suspicion of and contempt for it, and surrendering his desire for control, the king develops respect for mysteries he was not aware of and does not yet understand. He develops insight. He develops wisdom. He develops humility and compassion. The queen, as the personification of the soul, is also transformed as the king enters into relationship with her. She is no longer forced to remain in a dissociated state. She is no longer enthralled to the deficient values and limited perception represented by the old king. Nor is she any longer bound by the powerful unconscious drives of blind instinct to which he also was bound. The values of the heart begin to be heard and strengthened. Feeling begins to function in a more conscious, related way as both king and queen are transformed. As in the story of the Sleeping Beauty, the king discovers a new relationship with the queen as she becomes his beloved and bride. Where before there had been a hedge of thorns separating them, now king and queen are joined together in the bridal chamber of the soul. This alchemical union works a profound transformation of both, resulting in the birth of the child of the new consciousness. Both have to undergo a process of fragmentation, dismemberment, reconstitution, and regeneration described by the different stages of the alchemical great work. In relation to the man or woman of today, this process is essential for them both, since woman has been educated in the same way as man, has absorbed the same values, and been imprinted with the same ideas, and may give the highest value to the masculine principle and the rational mind, knowing nothing of the deeper dimension of the soul and the invisible dimension of reality. In the Kabbalistic tradition, and many alchemists were Kabbalists, the union of the king and queen in their regenerated state signifies the meeting or union of the male and female branches of the tree of life in the heart center of Tifereth, in the central pillar, whose signature is beauty and harmony. There are some very beautiful alchemical images of the hermaphrodite, who symbolizes this union of Sol and Luna, king and queen, and these can be related to the imagery of union in Kabbalah. In one such image, to the left of the king and the right of the queen, are two tree-like forms, each planted in a stone, one hung with red suns and the other with silver moons, representing the two pillars or branches of the tree of life. The unified king and queen in the center, whose feet also rest on two stones, symbolize the completion of the alchemical work in the union or conjunctio of the two natures of the king and the queen. Beneath their feet lies a dragon who symbolizes the prima materia of alchemy, and also Mercurius, whose meaning will be explained later. Those who are familiar with Kundalini Yoga will be able to relate the two pillars or branches of the tree of life with the two channels, the lunar Ida and the solar Pingala, which meet in the central channel of the Sushumna, as the creative fire of the goddess Kundalini makes her ascent from the base of the spine to her flowering in and above the head. See chapter 16. So similar are these three traditions that it seems possible that each discovered a similar method of transmuting consciousness through specific exercises, visualizations, and meditative practices. The prima materia. The prima materia is the foundation of the alchemical work, the raw material out of which the stone or the gold or divine elixir is produced. The alchemist said, "This matter lies before the eyes of all. Everybody sees it, touches it, loves it, but knows it not. It is glorious and vile, precious and of small account, and is found everywhere. To be brief, our matter has as many names as there are things in the world. That is why the foolish know it not." I have long wondered whether they could have meant that spirit is the prima materia, present within everything, seen by all, yet unrecognized because our consciousness is not capable of recognizing its presence within all the forms of life, having been taught for centuries that spirit is not present in nature or matter. The alchemist said to look for the prima materia in what has been most despised. In the prima materia are all the elements that have been rejected and shut out of our conscious mind. Here are the deepest instincts, the deepest feelings, and the deepest capacity for relationship with life. Above all, the elements that were associated with the despised or neglected feminine and excluded from spirit: nature, matter, soul, and body. The alchemists called the prima materia black earth, or the dragon, and sometimes even shit. When Paracelsus started his teaching at the University of Basel, he put a steaming pot of human excrement on the table and said, "This is what the work is all about. This is life. This is God." The response of the horrified students was to pull him off the podium and chase him out of the classroom. He was probably lucky to escape with his life. The dragon. The dragon is the most eloquent and powerful image of the prima materia. As has been explained in chapter 12, the dragon is an image of the immense and unrecognized power of instinct, which ultimately is the creative and destructive power of life itself. the power that lives in and through all of us in an untransformed or unconscious state. As with the Eastern traditions, the art of the alchemist was to assist in bringing this apparently chaotic and overwhelming power to a fully awakened state, yet never to forget that he was its servant, never its master, using it for his own ends. The so-called black arts describe the work of someone who is enthralled to the dragon, serving his own desire for power or the desire for the power of governments, a situation that could be related to the many scientists who have been working to develop weapons capable of destroying life. Paradoxically, the dragon presents the greatest danger to us, and it's also the guardian of our greatest treasure, the gold that is the outcome of the alchemical great work. Mercurius. Mercurius is one of the most enigmatic figures in alchemy and is sometimes shown in male and sometimes female form, or in the later stages of the alchemical process as a hermaphrodite. The origin of Mercurius goes back to Hermes, or the Egyptian Thoth, the guide of the soul in the underworld. Many alchemical images portray Mercurius holding a caduceus and its entwined serpents. The alchemists saw him, her, for Mercurius was often androgynous, as many different forms, as the prima materia, the primal matter that is to be transformed by spirit, as spirit itself, and as the guide, agent of transformation and the longed-for treasure and goal of the alchemical work, the philosophical gold, elixir, or stone. They recognized Mercurius as the living gold, the divine creative fire, the lumen naturae, the light of unseen spirit hidden within the forms of life, matter, and each one of us. Some alchemists associated Mercurius with the Holy Spirit. Perplexingly, Mercurius could take the form of a dragon, a lion, a wolf, a raven, a dove, and a phoenix, and many other images, including the hermaphrodite, depending on which stage of the alchemical process was being portrayed. During the process of transformation, the dragon is slain, the lion has its paws cut off, the wolf is killed, as these symbolic images of the destructive or dangerous aspect of the instinct, the will to power, lust, cruelty, greed, are transformed. What the alchemists seem to be saying is that Mercurius is everything because spirit is everything, viewed at different stages of its own awakening and transformation within the soul of the alchemist. It is important to bear in mind that all these images were related to actual changes in the constitution of the minerals in the alchemical retort or vessel. All over Europe, particularly in the great cathedrals, the image of the green man, Mercurius, gazes out at us from entrance arches, ceiling bosses, choir stalls, and carvings at the top of columns. All these marvelous images are the work of the master builders of the Middle Ages, many of whom were familiar with alchemy and its secrets. All these images proclaim, I am the lumen naturae, the light of nature, the ever-living presence of the creative spirit. Spirit as light that is all around you, permeating all that you see and touch as matter. Another name for the lumen naturae was the anima mundi. The image of the green man goes back to Osiris, Attis, and Tammuz, all gods of the earth's regeneration. As the alchemists watched the matter in their alchemical vessel transform before their eyes, matter came alive. They saw it undergo a transformation, and they began to speak to it and to respond to the images it gave rise to through their imagination. The mystery drew them into the midst of itself. What scientists are discovering now rests on foundations they laid centuries ago. But the alchemists saw themselves as the servants, not the masters of the stone, and they knew that the dangers involved in the work were haste, arrogance, and avarice. Listening to the scientists speaking of their excitement and wonder at the discovery of the Higgs boson particle, one can see them as modern alchemists, drawn to work together in the quest to penetrate the mysteries of the universe, astounded and moved by what they are discovering, yet aware of how much more there is to be discovered. Yet the humility of the alchemists may be missing. Sophia, or divine wisdom. The feminine image of divine wisdom, or the Holy Spirit, is the presiding image of alchemy. The alchemists call themselves the sons of wisdom. Sometimes she is named Anima Mundi, sometimes Sophia, Sapientia, or Lady Alchemia. Alchemists who were Kabbalists knew her as the Shekinah, the bride of God, the divine ground of the phenomenal world. All these images point to the hidden wisdom of nature which the alchemists took as their guide, although they also knew that their work was contra naturam, against nature, because it went against the attitudes and instinctual habits that were so hard to overcome. They saw themselves working with nature, assisting the release of spirit hidden within her forms. But they knew that divine wisdom represented far more than what we call nature. We are connected with each other and with planetary and cosmic life through an immense and complex web of hidden relationships that scientists are only beginning to discover as they try to fathom the mystery of dark matter and the 95% of the universe that still eludes their understanding. This inner life of the cosmos, as I have suggested in chapters 4 and 15, is best described in metaphysical language by the idea of cosmic soul, and by the image in the Hindu and Buddhist tradition of the unifying net of Indra. The feminine archetype has always been associated with the earth, with nature, and with soul. Not soul in a personal sense, but soul as the unseen dimension of reality and the great connecting web of life. For many thousands of years, this cosmic matrix of relationship was personified by the image of the Great Mother, and later by specific goddesses like Hathor and Isis in Egypt. Later, it was carried by the image of divine wisdom and the Holy Spirit in the Old Testament, by the Shekinah of Kabbalah, and by the cosmic or world soul of Plato and Plotinus. Still later in the Middle Ages, by the image of the Black Madonna and the Holy Grail, the mysterious vessel or stone described as the source of all abundance. For many centuries in European culture that was deeply repressive of the feminine, alchemy secretly carried the image of this disowned aspect of the divine. Alchemists had visions of a cosmic woman and knew her to be a living force and divine presence, pouring out the waters of love and illumination on humanity. Perhaps this is why Dr. Marie-Louise von Franz says in her commentary on an alchemical text called the Aurora Consurgens, "Alchemy lays upon man the task and confers upon him the dignity of rescuing the hidden feminine aspect of God from imprisonment in matter by his opus, and of reuniting her with the manifest masculine deity." In memorable words in this text, wisdom speaks to the alchemist, saying, "Understand, ye sons of wisdom, protect me, and I will protect thee. Give me my due, that I may help thee." One of the most powerful and profound statements of alchemy, this is a message for our own times, when the instinctive desire to protect nature and serve the life of the planet is arising in so many of us. The Aurora Consurgens. This is an extraordinary book that anyone wishing to understand more about alchemy would benefit from reading and would find fascinating. I have included some passages from the Aurora because they are deeply meaningful and very numinous for me, and may perhaps resonate with others too. Not only are the words of the text exquisitely beautiful, but the commentary by Dr. Marie-Louise von Franz is profound and illuminating. She says that the Aurora is one of the earliest medieval treatises in which we find the nascent idea that the alchemical opus involves an inner experience, and that a numinous content, wisdom, the anima, is the secret which the adept was looking for in the chemical substances. The author of this illuminating book that brings alchemy so vividly to life was believed by Dr. von Franz to be Thomas Aquinas, the great medieval theologian. In it, a man speaks of a vision and a revelation he had just prior to his death, a revelation whose words were transcribed as he spoke them by the monks sitting with him. It is truly remarkable that this text has come through to us apparently uncensored. In the first chapter, a mystical female figure is introduced, the personification of the Sapientia Dei, or wisdom of God, the same figure who appears in the biblical book of Proverbs, Ben Sirach, and the wisdom of Solomon, and who represents the divine cosmic ground which gives life to all. It is she who suddenly manifests and speaks to the author of the Aurora. Dr. von Franz comments, "We can understand how shattered the author of Aurora must have been when wisdom suddenly appeared to him in personal form. Doubtless he did not know before how real an archetypal figure like wisdom is, and he had taken her merely as an abstract idea. For an intellectual, it is a shattering experience when he discovers that what he was seeking is not just an idea, but is psychically real in a far deeper sense, and can come upon him like a thunderclap. He is saying that she is not merely an intellectual concept, but is devastatingly real, actual, and palpably present in matter." His experience describes the power and numinosity of the visionary experience of the anima mundi, or soul of the world. He heard words which invoked Solomon's description of wisdom. See the Wisdom of Solomon 7, 10, 21-29, 8, 1-2. She it is that Solomon chose to have instead of light, and above all beauty and health. For all gold in her sight shall be esteemed as a little sand, and silver shall be counted as clay. And her fruit is more precious than all the riches of this world, and all the things that are desired are not to be compared with her. She is a tree of life to them that lay hold on her, and an unfailing light. He who hath found this science, it shall be his rightful food forever. Such a one is as rich as he who hath a stone from which fire is struck, who can give fire to whom he will, as much as he will, and when he will, without loss to himself. Wisdom spoke to him, saying, "Be turned to me with all your heart, and do not cast me aside, because I am black and swarthy, because the sun hath changed my colour, and the waters have covered my face, because I stick fast in the mire of the deep, and my substance is not disclosed. Wherefore, out of the depths have I cried, and from the abyss of the earth with my voice, to all you that pass by the way, attend and see me. If any shall find one like unto me, I will give unto his hand the morning star." And in words that resonate with those attributed to Jesus in the Gospels, "I am that land of holy promise, which floweth with milk and honey, and bringeth forth sweetest fruit in due season. Wherefore have all the philosophers commended me, and sowed in me their gold and silver and incombustible grain. And unless that grain falling into me die, itself shall remain alone. But if it die, it bringeth forth threefold fruit. For the first it shall bring forth shall be good, because it was sown in good earth, namely of pearls. The second likewise good, because it was sown in better earth, namely of leaves, silver. The third shall bring forth 1,000-fold, because it was sown in the best earth, namely of gold. For from the fruits of this grain is made the food of life, which cometh down from heaven. If any man shall eat of it, he shall live without hunger." I think this revelatory alchemical text lays the ground for what is emerging in human consciousness now, an awareness of the divinity of nature and matter, as well as our own divinity, and our responsibility to protect the planet from our unthinking exploitation of its resources. The phases of the work. Alchemy defines 3 and sometimes 4 phases of the great work, saying, "This art is like an embryo and then the birth of a child. The process is circulatory and continuous and moves through different phases over and over again, so what is defined as the negredo or blackness of the first phase may be experienced again by the alchemist in the context of the final phase, the rubedo. The 7 processes involved in the alchemical great work are the rescue of the lost feminine aspect of spirit hidden within nature and ourselves, the process of transformation involved in this rescue, the death of the old consciousness symbolized by the old king and queen, the formation of the new consciousness symbolized by the young king and queen, the formation of the hermaphrodite, the union of the 2 transformed elements, the integration of body, soul, and spirit, the union with what the alchemists called the unus mundus, the divine cosmic ground. Stage 1, the first phase of the lesser work, the creation of the white stone. This phase is known as the nigredo or separatio and is ruled by the element fire. The word nigredo means blackness, the blackness of the prima materia as well as the blackness of depression. The raven was the symbol of this stage, where the alchemist, undergoing the process of transformation, found himself falling into what is described as a blackness blacker than black, a blackness which he saw reflected in the blackening of the matter in the alchemical retort, and it could be said to correspond cosmically with the dark phase of the moon. The nigredo may also be associated with the many years of loneliness and isolation of someone who has been called to follow this inner path. The alchemists also named this state the unio naturalis and the massa confusa, as well as the black earth and the dragon, all terms which describe the semi-conscious state, the unconscious entanglement of different aspects of our psyche that is the inevitable result of our emergence from the matrix of nature. They saw the nigredo as the state of blind suffering and ignorance before the dawning of awareness. It may be said to describe the state where we live from day to day, responding to events as they happen, where we believe we have control of our lives, but are the victim of the complexes, imprinted ideas and beliefs, archaic drives, instinctual habits and values, which control both the collective life of humanity and ourselves in our individual lives. In this state, the spirit is not awake, not free, but is the prisoner or victim of all these things. The alchemical processes associated with the nigredo are putrefactio, decay, calcinatio, incineration, blackening or burning, and mortificatio, dying or suffocation. Paracelsus, a 16th century alchemist and physician, said, "Putrefaction is of so great efficacy that it blots out the old nature and transmutes everything into another new nature, and bears another new fruit. All living things die in it, all dead things decay, and then all these dead things regain life." The process of the separatio, or differentiating between the elements of our nature, is difficult, confusing, and often frightening, owing to the sense of losing control. In Jungian analysis, the nigredo or separatio brings one into direct contact with the shadow, or unknown aspect of one's own psyche. Our original sense of oneness is split into 2, and this can be experienced as a kind of dismemberment, often graphically illustrated in the alchemical texts. Yet, this work of differentiation and separation is the first stage of reuniting the conscious, solar aspect of the psyche with the unknown and dissociated lunar aspect, which includes the shadow and the whole realm of the soul. It brings us into direct contact with the power of the unknown archaic aspects of our psyche. The alchemist has first to separate out the different elements of body, soul, and spirit, and then reunite them in a new conscious union, based on the awareness that each is an essential aspect of spirit, that what was darkness, unknown, and even terrifying, can be illumined by the light of consciousness entering into or descending into that darkness. Paradoxically, the discovery of the light is through a descent into darkness. So they followed the instructions of the emerald tablet of Hermes Trismegistus, which said, "Thou shalt separate the earth from the fire, the subtle from the dense, gently, with great ingenuity." The word gently was given special emphasis, contrasting with the violence, contempt, and repression with which the body and the instincts had generally been treated. The alchemists called themselves washerwomen and cooks, and compared the process of transformation to being cooked, kneaded, washed, hardened, softened, raised, lowered, divided, and finally united. Study, meditate, sweat, work, wash, cook, they said. It is an impossible process to describe, and the images may offer a better understanding than the words. One cannot delete something from the psyche as one deletes a sentence or paragraph on a computer. One can only gradually become aware of a hitherto unknown aspect of oneself and slowly deepen one's insight into the causes, power, and persistence of unconscious habits of behavior and projections, causes that originate not only in personal experience, but in the whole religious and political inheritance of a civilization. This insight is part of the process of the dawning of a different kind of light within the darkness of what was previously unknown. Jung stressed the vital importance of the ego in this work. The ego, or conscious personality, is the mediator between the conscious part of our psyche, the king, and the unknown part of it that he called the unconscious, the queen. Without its cooperation, no transformation can take place. Trying to get rid of it creates resistance. As the new center of consciousness comes into being, the ego is strengthened, not in the sense of imposing its will, but in the sense of being strong enough not to be overpowered or inflated by the emerging elements of the unconscious. Jung's own experience, described in great detail in the Red Book, testifies to this need. The conscious ego or conscious mind has to learn to relate to this greater power rather than to deny its presence or suppress its voice and its attempts to communicate. Ultimately, it becomes a servant of this greater power and surrenders to its guidance. Today, and probably in the past, the call to enter the alchemical process may be initiated by trauma, the experience of profound and devastating loss, where the foundation of our life seems to disintegrate. The ego, or conscious personality, can be assailed by a paralyzing depression, a deep melancholia, and lose all hope and will to live. These feelings may result from the loss of a parent, a partner, or child, or from the loss of our marriage, our home, our health, our job, or our money, or from a betrayal of some kind, our life seemingly reduced to dust and ashes. If we can understand this traumatic event as a preparation for a new orientation in our life, even as a call of the buried spirit, this may be of some help. Otherwise, it may be experienced as blind, apparently pointless suffering, the infliction of a cruel, negative, incomprehensible fate. There may be the risk of suicide if there is no insight into what is happening. Writers and artists know that this descent into the paralyzing darkness of depression can be a prelude to a new creative initiative, but it feels as if, like Persephone, one has been snatched into the underworld and has been abandoned there. If one looks for a contemporary example of the Nigredo on the world stage, the devastating tsunami that wiped out the coastal villages of Japan would provide it, as does the collapse of the euro and the banking system, together with the unemployment and human suffering caused by them. This experience of disintegration and mortificatio can be the prelude to a new beginning, a new and hitherto unimagined creative initiative. Stage 2, the second phase of the lesser work, known as the albedo, solutio, or purificatio. The two primary symbols of the phase of the albedo are the dove of the Holy Spirit and the white stone. This phase is presided over by the element water and is about baptism and regeneration in the watery womb of the soul, awakening to the feminine principle and the neglected feeling values, opening the eye of the heart in the sense described in chapter 15. In this phase, water, and specifically water associated with the ethereal substance of the soul, the aqua permanens, is the agent of transformation. This divine water, the alchemist said, makes the dead living and the living dead. It lightens the darkness and darkens the light. Other symbols describing this phase are the white rose and the lily, the pelican and the swan, and most importantly, the young queen. The moon is also a symbol of the albedo, for it shines in the darkness and presides over the mysteries of transformation that take place in the darkness, in a part of the psyche of which we are not aware at the beginning of the alchemical process. The rising moon signifies the dawning of insight, understanding, and a developing relationship with spirit. The copious shedding of tears accompanies this stage, as fixed habits, beliefs, and powerful complexes are dissolved or melted down. It can indicate the opening of the heart in the first powerful experience of deep feeling. The alchemists compared the albedo to the gradual whitening of the early dawn sky after the darkness of night. In vivid imagery, they describe the process of transforming the prima materia of the initial psychic state by repeated washings, cleansings, purifications, repeated immersions in water, and repeated submissions to the heating power of fire, which together separate out and remove the rust or verdigris which had accrued to and hidden the gold of the spirit in the preconscious state. So there are images of the sun drowning in the mercurial fountain, the king sweating in a confined space or drowning and calling out for help. But in the deep waters of the soul, the king and queen are being brought together in what is known as the first conjunctio, described in many images. The imagination begins to be activated. New possibilities are born. The phase of the albedo describes the process of the soul beginning to become conscious of the hidden spirit, whom the alchemists called Mercurius, and whose secret presence oversees the great work of the process of transmutation. In this phase, they began to work consciously with spirit, to serve it with trust and devotion, yet also become aware of how they might be deceived or misled by its trickster-like qualities, which in essence are the trickster-like qualities of the shadow. Some Christian alchemists likened this phase to the Assumption of the Virgin. Little by little, and from day to day, wrote the 16th century Belgian alchemist Gerhard Dorn, he will perceive with his mental eyes and with the greatest joy some sparks of divine illumination. Stage 3, the greater work, the rubedo, conjunctio, and multiplicatio, the reunification of body, soul, and spirit. The alchemists named the third and final phase of the alchemical process the greater work, the rubedo. In some texts, it is preceded by a phase called the citronitas, or yellowing phase. They likened the rubedo to what the medieval alchemists and mystics called the rising dawn, aurora, or golden hour, aurea hora, as a description of the soul's mystical union with God. They also likened it to resurrection and to the reddening of the sky as the sun begins to rise to the zenith, spreading its irradiating and warming rays over the earth. Red gold is the color of the rubedo, and the red rose and the red stone are symbols of the completion of the great work. The phase of the rubedo involves the long and difficult work of fixing the new attitude, so that it is stable and constant, not alternating between the old and the new states, and above all, avoiding the danger of inflation. It may involve commitment to some creative work, bringing into manifestation insights and knowledge that have been learned, communicating these to the world, or serving life in some way which reflects a deeper compassion and commitment. It can be compared to the physical process of churning milk into butter, turning grapes into wine, wheat into bread, raw elements into cooked food. As my teacher, Barbara Summers, once unforgettably described it, the jam begins to set. This phase describes the awakening of the conscious personality to full awareness of spirit as guide and companion within the illumined soul, the conscious alignment with spirit, and the final union, or conjunctio, of the two formerly estranged aspects of the psyche, the solar king and lunar queen, in Jungian terms, the conscious and the unconscious. There is no longer conflict and enmity between them, nor indeed the inflated claim of the conscious mind that it constitutes the totality of consciousness, ignoring the existence of the soul. The rubedo announces the full expansion or awakening of the heart, the incandescent flowering of the imagination that a 16th century alchemist called Martin Ruland, who was a pupil of Paracelsus, called the star in man, the celestial and supercelestial body. Body, soul, and spirit are unified and transfigured in this experience of enlightenment and union, sometimes at the moment of death, as in the aurora, but also, I believe, in the startling enlightenment of the near-death experience, which offers a glimpse of life beyond death. We grow through the negredo and albedo phase of alchemy into the rubedo. We cannot force entry into it by spiritual exercises or any formulation of goals. It may happen to us, as with the near-death experience, or we can grow into it through the expansion of the heart, the instinctive capacity to love, to give to others, to serve life through an awakened compassion. His Holiness the Dalai Lama would be a modern example of this capacity to give and to serve. The conjunctio involves the whole process of psychic transformation, as the union of the two aspects of the psyche proceeds through the different phases of alchemy that are repeated over and over again in what the alchemists called the circulatio, relating this word to the rotation of the planets around the sun. The alchemical transformations the alchemists worked with were carried out during appropriate astrological transits, conforming to the understanding that the cosmic events in the above are reflected in the realm of the below. But in another sense, the conjunctio stands for the final awakening, the final union with the divine ground, now fully recognized, honored, and consciously present within the soul. The power to transform, to serve, to heal comes from this source. The stone or elixir has the power to multiply, multiplicatio, as in the miracle of the loaves and the fishes in the Gospel. The whole alchemical process is about the incarnation of spirit in the human soul, and the long incubation or preparation needed for the soul to become capable of containing the tension, dangers, and revelation of the gradual incarnation or awakening of spirit. The final phase of alchemy is about becoming aware of and entering into the immortal body of light, the starry or celestial body that we may ultimately inhabit after our death. It is about the awakening of the heart, the flow of compassion towards all living things, and the union with the divine ground that the alchemists call the unus mundus. A primary symbol of the rubedo is the phoenix, symbolizing life regenerated from the ashes of the old unconscious life. The beautiful and evocative images of the treasure belong to this final stage. The quintessential gold, the stone of the wise, the pearl of great price, the golden phoenix, the elixir of life, the flower of immortality, the heavenly balsam, and the divine water, as well as the perfume of flowers, a flowering tree, and the celestial blue color. One text describes the stone, or lapis, as a light without shadow, a marvelous thing that makes a great golden fountain to gush forth from itself. Conclusion. So, to summarize, the alchemists wanted to free the quintessential gold of the spirit hidden within nature, to free the divine life impulse from the beliefs, fixed attitudes, instinctual habits, and unconscious projections that veil it from us. Their aim was to help this mysterious spirit to become conscious in themselves, so they could come to the full experience of its presence and guidance. But in doing this, they knew they were actually influencing and perhaps transforming in a positive sense, by refraining from harming it, the very nature of matter and therefore all life, since all things are connected. The gradual revelation of the treasure involved great loneliness, suffering, and sacrifice on the one hand, and illumination, wonder, and inexpressible joy on the other, as the light of the unified consciousness dawned. No one, wrote Gerhard Dorn, may accomplish this work except through affliction, humility, and love, for it is the gift of God to his humble servants. As they watch the matter of their own psychic life transform in the mirror of the alchemical retort, the greatest and also the most humble of the alchemists experienced the immense mystery of what they were witnessing. They realized they were assisting spirit in the process of its own transformation, bringing itself to consciousness over eons of earth time, reconnecting creation with its source. They had revealed to them in a gradual process of illumination the divinity of nature and all life processes. They saw that one divine spirit was at work in all forms of life, as well as in their own human consciousness. They sought to bring to birth in themselves the hidden spirit that longed to be rescued from its buried state in nature and themselves. In accomplishing this double act of redemption, they became the sons of divine wisdom, inheritors of the treasure, the true philosophical gold. As their understanding grew, they realized they were the ministers, not the masters of the stone, their lives illumined by the wisdom of the Holy Spirit, eternally pouring forth the water of life. The three phases of the great work blend imperceptibly into each other, and they are repeated over and over again in a process known as the circulatio, as the threefold union of body, soul, and spirit proceeds. There is not one awakening, but many. Not one illumination, but many. As the darkness at the heart of our nature is entered, so the windows of the soul are opened and the light begins to shine, the light radiating from the lumen naturae, the light that is the hidden ground of all life, revealing what was previously unknown or shrouded in darkness. The image of the alchemical diagram of the squared circle points to the recognition of the incarnation of spirit in matter, the unification of the masculine and feminine principles, and the conjunctio or indissoluble marriage of the above with the below. The late Father Bede Griffiths, 1906 to 1993, one of the great sages of our time, tells how he suffered a stroke and, thinking he was dying, prepared for death. But instead of death, he felt the need to surrender to the mother, to the feminine. He made that act of surrender and felt a wave of love overwhelm him, a wave so powerful that he didn't know whether he would be able to survive it. He realized that all of us carry this love within our being, but are shut off from it because the mind gets in the way of it and creates the dualistic consciousness in which we live. Since that experience, he said he was able to live beyond the dualistic mind in the time that remained to him. He said this about the great work: the soul discovers its source of being in the spirit. The mind is open to this inner light. The will is energized by this inner power. The very substance of the soul is changed. It is made a partaker of the divine nature. And this transformation affects not only the soul, but also the body. The matter of the body, its actual particles, is transformed by the divine power and transfigured by the divine light, like the body of Christ at the resurrection. In becoming aware of our soul, in discovering how to relate to it, transform and be transformed by it, heal its wounds, listen to its guidance, receive illumination and insight from our dreams, we help to bring about the marriage between the king and the queen, and eventually the sacred marriage of all humanity with the divine ground, which is the principal theme of alchemy, Kabbalah, and Vedanta, and is, I believe, the tremendous destiny of the human race. This unrecognized yet immanent Holy Spirit is the flow of life in our veins, the flux and flow of our thoughts, the primordial power of our instincts, the miracle of our bodily organism, the creative genius of our imagination. Anyone who has experienced the sheer ecstasy of serving life to the utmost of his or her ability will have touched the spirit and experienced its awesome power. One is the stone, one the vessel, one the procedure and one the medicine, they said. The process of transformation is unique for each one of us, yet intrinsically the same for all. Alchemy gives us the blazing revelation of the divinity of life in the reunion of body, soul, and spirit, and calls us to the service of that life with whatever creative gifts it has bestowed on us. What I have learned in the last 50 years is that alchemy is a return journey to the unseen dimension of spirit, with the help of spirit, a journey that can take each one of us as far as our longing can reach, a process that attunes our awareness to a hidden order of reality, a revelation that we are at all times and in all places living within the light of spirit. There is nothing beyond or outside spirit. There is only one life, which is the life of the cosmos and the life of each and all. Each one of us is a unique atom in the invisible life of the whole. A discovery that there is no death for consciousness, nor does the matter of the body really die. Our purpose on this planet is to discover this truth and live this truth with every breath of life, to love and serve life as best we can by doing harm to no one and activating the flow of light and love in our lives. The Alchemist's Prayer. O most singular and unspeakable presence, first and last in the universe, heighten the fury of my fire and burn away the dross of my being. Cleanse my soiled soul. Bathe me in your awesome light. Set me free from my history and cut me loose from my boundaries. Unite me with the one thing hidden in my life wherein is my only strength. Fill me with your presence. Allow me to see through your eye. Grant me entry to your mind. Let me resonate with your will. Make me transparent to your flame and fashion me into a lens for your light only. Transmute me into an incorruptible stone in your eternal service, like the golden light that surrounds you.